Von Herrnung shrugged contemptuously, though his keen ear did not miss the fact that the guns were coming nearer. That must go on for a little, until the last show of resistance is broken down. If it be a military virtue not to be aware when you are beaten, your big-jawed, dull-brained, short-headed British bulldogs of soldiers have that virtue, of course. But comes the awakening. The Russian Navy has been blown off the Baltic. The Tsar has accepted our Kaiser's ultimatum. The Belgian government has made its submission. The Belgian army has laid down its arms. Our 17-inch siege howitzers are bombarding the shores of England from their emplacements at Calais. The army of invasion is embarking. Your British Navy, the floating bulwark of your empire, lies at the bottom of the North Sea. Ministers run from one end of England to the other, begging, coaxing, persuading your proletariat. There is panic in the English War Office and despair at Buckingham Palace, rebellion in the streets of London, debacle in the city, and stampede in the West End. Tomorrow, the Emperor of Greater Germany and the Crown Prince, Viceroy of the Brito-German possessions, will, with the Empress, enter Paris. 10 miles of films will record for all posterity this colossal and magnificent scene. The London pageant of triumph follows. Well may you weep, my unlucky fellow, over the collapse and ruin of your proud country, for tears were really trickling from the puckered eyelids of the now flushed and quivering face. Himmelkreuzbemännelment, you are not weeping. You are laughing, you dirty English swine. What else do you expect when you're so dashed amusin'? Gasped Franky painfully. Roll along with some more of it, why don't you, Anatole? You do not believe me, no? You think that I am rotting. Von Herrnung shrugged his huge shoulders and laughed with forced heartiness. Always to rot, that is the English custom. He added with a cruel relish, Desto besser, you will die more pleasantly, for of course you will die. This is the 3rd day you have lain here, alter young, and you have the smell and color of gangrene. You are a lump of carrion, Norwater, not worth the taking away. Possibly not. The eyes met his calmly, though their laughter had died out. It angered von Herrnung to be balked of the ferocious enjoyment he had promised himself. He finished the cognac slowly, seeking in the fiery drink a spur to inventiveness, and sucked his mustache slowly as he capped and pocketed the flask. I am hellishly sorry, I assure you, Norwater, he said, adopting a bluff and hearty manner as he sucked the stump of the nearly finished cigar. One is hardened to death and wounds in war, but one is human, and I have been on friendly terms with many Englishmen and Angename Englanderin such as Lady Watt, whom I have known for years, and that superb brunette Miss Saxam. We flirted desperately that night in Paris. Later on, in London, she became my mistress. You lie, you aeroplane-stealing cad? Said Franky, feebly but with great distinctness. Von Herrnung swore and spat, full in his face. Its nostrils winced disgust, but the brown eyes were indomitable. And from the blue lips came a mere thread of human utterance, pregnant with scathing irony. I say to you what the Belgian woman said to your Kaiser when his horse splashed her. This kind of filth wipes off. You think so, eh, you? Von Herrnung clenched his fist, and might have dashed it in the eyes that defied him, but for a sudden, significant change in the sound of those distant guns. The barrage of the German field artillery was becoming intermittent. The slogging of the British had increased in energy. A flare of red spurted into the Kaiserman's pasty cheeks, and his hard eyes lighted eagerly. He forgot his rule of sleeping off liquor before again taking to the air. With a confidence in his own powers largely justified by his successes, his mind leaped to the scene of conflict. Now, when the German batteries were weakening, was the moment for the arrival of a pilot aviator of the Imperial Field Flight, skilled as aerial observer and signaller, and known to be indifferent to risk. Here was the chance one had hoped for: restitution of the forfeited decoration, restoration to the Emperor's favor, reinstatement in the lost place upon the regimental roster, promotion, the bestowal of new honors, danced before him like little gaudy demons, drowning with their buzz the voice of prudence, luring him to the essay. I am compelled to leave you now, Norwater, he said smilingly to the man on the stretcher. Thanks so much for our interesting chat. I shall carry away a pleasant recollection and leave you also a memento in the shape of a bomb, which I shall drop on you when I have climbed to a suitable height. So gut a bend, alter young, though before I go there is a trifling formality. He knelt down by the stretcher, and without unnecessary gentleness rifled the pockets of the wounded man. The victim had swooned when von Herrnung rose, transferring to his own person a small purse, heavy with English sovereigns, and a pigskin case full of crisp French banknotes, with a thin gold wristwatch that had a luminous dial and a coroneted monogram upon the back. Sheer waist, according to the German war book, issued by the Great Staff for the use of German officers, to leave upon the person of the fallen opponent articles likely to be of use to the conqueror. He rinsed his hands in the water can and dried them on his clothing, pulled up his helmet, fastened it and buttoned his pockets, straightened his bandolier, nodded pleasantly at the reflection of his giant person in the skewed wall mirror, jumped lightly through the window gap, and went upon his way. The slight figure lying so still upon the stretcher had never been remarkable for beauty of proportion. The sharpened face with its hue of old wax, the discolored stains and the hair and grime upon it, had never been handsome even in health. But thrown back and tilted upwards, with the rosy glow of the setting sun touching the high brow, and violet shadows framing the sealed eyelids and close-shut mouth, it did not lack the quality of nobility. There was something knightly about the still form. He revived to pain and loneliness and burning thirst, the squalor and abomination of desolation, the louder, nearer thudding of the German drum fire, and the dogged reply of the unweakening British guns. He might have deemed the events that had taken place illusions born of weakness and fever, but for the testimony of the looking-glass that hung away upon the wall. There was the familiar vista of the market square, with the charred ruins of town hall and clock tower, yet sending up thin columns of bluish smoke into the radiant air. You could even make out a corner of the great stack of stiffened, blackening bodies. Nothing was wanting but that the Taube should still be resting on the cobblestones like a drowsy white vampire bat glutted with human blood. But the Taube was not there. From high overhead, the buzzing note of the hoverer came down to Franky. He could see through the rents in the penthouse of broken, flooring the white, winged shape hanging poised overhead. He even fancied he could descry the helmeted, goggled head of von Herrnung peering over the bulwarks of the bird body, the jut of his elbow and the pear-shaped wire cages in which the bombs hung ready to his hand. The thought of Margot and the child was an exquisite agony. The thirst for life, delectable life, revived in Franky ragingly. In dreadful expectation of the deafening crash, and the rending pang, and the burning bite of the greenish flame, the haggard eyes were straining upwards, when the terror went out of them and their lids flickered down. Let the fellow do his worst. Where was the good of hating? Christ had prayed for his murderers when they nailed him on the tree. The numb hand feebly made the sacred sign, and the tension passed with the terror. There was a dull boom high overhead, and some heavy objects fell in a neighboring backyard. Little bits of metal rattled on Franky's plank penthouse, and some warm drops pattered on Franky's face and wetted the hand that lay upon his breast. Not rain, but something sticky and thick, with a sickly, well-known odor. He lifted the hand. Oh, horrible! The heavens were raining blood. Too weak to even guess at what had happened, he fell again into a stupor. The hollowed chest heaved at longer intervals beneath the first aid bandaging over which had been thrown the khaki coat. Long, cold breaths expired through the panting nostrils. The eyes showed a glassy line of white between the parted lids. He was dreaming. Dreaming of being borne along in a shadowy boat under starless skies, through clear lucent darkness, over another darkness unfathomable, and yet diamond clear. Perhaps no more water than the atmosphere above it was air, both possibly elements unknown. The boat crowded with seated shapes, 3 of them feminine. A tall, black-hooded, black-mantled figure in the sternway seemed to impel the vessel with a single oar. Is this stuff water? The quiet voice of a man seated beside Franky had asked the question. Franky slipped his hand over the boat's low side and withdrew it shining, but not dripping, thinking. It is and it is. Fairly odd. Wonder where we're bound for, that fellow sculling. Reminds me of old Karen in the 6th Aeneid when I swatted Virgil at school. Me too. Thought seemed to pass current as speech, for though Franky had not voiced his reflection, the tall man who sat next him had answered instantly. But if this is the ninefold, what about the cold and venomous waters, consuming iron and breaking the rarest vessels? The speaker dipped his hand over the side and brought it up all shining but not dripping, and touched his lips with it and went on, smiling. Besides, if you and I are alive, where are our golden bows, and if we're dead, where are our oboli? We ought to have 'em. It wouldn't be good form not. Why, your Braithwaite of ours. How is it I didn't know you? Why did I suppose? Franky broke off, for Braithwaite's very recent exit from the stage of life had been performed after a highly colored fashion, when the Germans had showered heavy shells of high explosive upon the little Belgian town. "That fellow sculling," he said to cover the slight embarrassment. "Somehow I fancy I've seen him before." "Ah, now I recollect." Braithwaite was answering the thought of the previous moment. "I did get crumped up pretty badly. Should have come off lots worse hadn't it been for Cruz. He threw himself in front of me when the shell dropped so near us." He spoke of the sergeant major of his company who had been killed at the same moment. "Don't you recognize him? Cruz is the man who's sculling. I caught a glimpse of his face just now. It can be nobody but Cruz." "Beggin' your pardon, sor." The soft South Irish brogue sounded more apologetic than contradictory. The thick, sturdy figure of the speaker, uncertainly disgrayed in the clear obscurity, leaned anxiously over from the opposite seat. "'Tis Father Walsh. May those above reward him for an bold gentleman. That crawlin' out on his four bones to the advanced threnches at a place they did be callin' La Bossy or such like, to give holy absolution to myself and Hanlon and two other boys the loyal Irish rifles that were in a bad way. Wouldn't I swear to his skin on a gate, or the bend of his beak anywhere?" The voice hesitated. "Baron, for the memory I have that thim wands was afther pluggin' him through the head, and himself just layin' the blessed sacrament on me tongue." "Beg pardon?" A woman's voice joined in the conversation. "Sorry to interrupt, but I know him, really. It isn't the surgeon major or Father anybody." Franky recognized in the clear obscurity the flowing white headdress and gray Red Cross badged cape of an army nursing sister, as she went on. "It's just our civil surgical specialist, who died of double pneumonia, septic, at the Harfleur Military Hospital. Had a touch of influenza and would get out of bed to operate on one of the sisters. A sudden case of appendix trouble with typhoid thrown in. Oh, yes, the operation was successful, but the sister didn't recover. Still, the CSS gave his life for hers all the same. Good egg him, but are you quite sure there's no mistake with regard to our friend there?" Franky nodded towards the tall, black-hooded, black-mantled figure plying the oar, upright in the stern. "Because just now I caught a glimpse of his face, and I could have sworn it was my grandfather, by a long sight the finest man I've ever come across. He dived over the yacht side and saved my life when I was drowning. It was the cow's season of 1894. I was a cheeky nipper of 8, and he was 71. And the chill and the excitement brought on a stroke or something. He was dead in his cabin berth next morning when his man went in with the mail." "Oh, you funnies." This with a clear little trill of laughter in the voice of a small girl. Franky could see her bright eyes dancing as she peeped at him from her niche between the army nurse and the small, black-habited elderly figure of a Sister of Charity in a deep starched gimp and wide-flanged cornet. "As if it could be anybody but my Dada, who pulled the soldiers out of the train that was all smashed up and burning, when me and Mummy—" "Taisez vous donc, Raymond," whispered the nun reprovingly. "It is not convenable that petites demoiselles should interrupt their elders thus. Remember where you are, and in what presence." "Please don't scold her," coaxed Franky, the devout lover of children. The nun smiled, meeting his entreating eyes. He smiled back and went on. "Right or wrong, we seem all agreed that our friend in the stern is a near relation or a close acquaintance of nearly every one of us. In every case, a supreme benefactor." "Surely, monsieur," she gave back in a hushed tone. "But surely, monsieur, the helper, the benefactor of us all." As the keel grated on unseen bottom, she folded her hands with a beautiful devoutness and sank upon her knees, drawing with her the child. The man of the loyal Irish followed her example. Franky found himself kneeling with the others, and as the boat's prow plowed into sand or shingle, and the ferryman, shipping his oar, moved shorewards with a shepherding gesture, the voyagers rose with a thrill of expectancy and followed with one accord. He stepped ashore, dropping the great black mantle, turned and faced them, spreading out his arms. Beauty divine, glory unspeakable. Chapter 67 *. The question, "Have I been honest?" Patrine asked herself over and over, kneeling by the open window, staring into the darkness. "Have I been just towards the man who never was a friend even when he played the lover? Did not my own attitude of cynical curiosity towards secret, hidden things bias his line of conduct towards me? Might not even von Herrnung have respected a girl who showed no inclination to flutter moth-like about the flaming torch of sin? No, he would not. But I could have saved myself even from scorching. I, who approached the flame too closely, and shall carry the scars of my burning to the grave. Drip, drip, drip. Water, oozing from the box that stood upon the table, was dropping on the carpet with the small, insistent sound. At the west end of the Catholic Church, where Patrine had told her story to a priest in the confessional, there was a great black crucifix, bearing a white thorn-crowned figure gashed with gory-seeming wounds. She had fancied that the blood from them dripped down upon the pavement as she had sat staring at the high altar, and wondering whether it were true that willful sin committed by men and women for whose salvation Christ had bled and died might not cause him suffering even now. She had been willing to sin for Sherbrand, and said so in her hour of madness. Yet the renunciation of her lover as a husband had been an act of the purest love. Perhaps God would overlook the one thing for the sake of the other. Perhaps he had really spoken by the mouth of that old priest whose tears had dropped upon his withered hands. Drip, drip, drip. Patrine began to suspect the source whence the sound proceeded. The people who had packed the roses, they must be roses, had wetted the cotton wool too heavily, the fools. The inlaid table and the carpet would suffer if the wet were not mopped up. One ought to ring for Mrs. Keese or Janey, or better still, see to it oneself. She half rose with this intention, then sank down again nervelessly. It was 10:30. The October night leaned close over London. Harley Street was muffled in velvet darkness. The veiled gleam of electric lights showed at its junction with Cavendish Square. The rumble of the tube train came from Portland Place. The faint shriek of the Northern Express sounded from Euston. A Brocken hunt of motorbuses screeched and clanked up the Marylebone Road and faded into distance. The rumble and roar of Oxford Street showed signs of diminution. It was possible to hear stray sentences spoken by people passing upon the pavement below. "I don't care," this from the shorter of two female figures that had halted before the house. The edge of light-colored skirt showing below her cloak, and the gleam of white cuffs framing the gloved hands with which she gestured, suggested a hospital nurse to Patrine. Taxation without representation is a crying injustice, and the men will wake up to it one of these days. And Mrs. Clash may be a noisy person, and Fanny Levin may drop her H's. I do myself when I get stirred up. But they are in earnest, and they've suffered cruel. For their convictions, look at this petrel, that one that always takes the chair. She's a physical wreck with the treatment she's had, and I know what I'm talking about. Haven't we had suffragettes brought to the hospital for treatment over and over, after they'd been pitched out of political meetings by stewards and half-throttled by police? What I say is, Moses, how late? We shall get locked out of the home if we don't run for it. And their light hurrying footsteps, and the unmistakable frou-frou of starched print accompanying, passed away up Harley Street. They must have come from the mass meeting of suffragists that had taken place at the Royal Hall. It had been a memorable evening. The atmosphere of the Royal Hall thronged not only with the members of the WSSS, but with representatives of many other women's unions and associations and societies and leagues, was highly charged with electricity. Mrs. Petrel, resolute-lipped, quiet-eyed, clear of diction and composed of manner, knew, as she sat in her chair beside the little table in the middle of the crowded platform, and better even than the plainclothes police among the audience, that at any moment the storm might break. She had advocated with all her much-tried strength an armistice for the war period, involving a temporary abandonment of militant methods and inflammatory addresses, in favor of a policy of active help and practical sympathy, alike honorable to her head and heart. Other societies, unions, leagues, and associations might have followed the lead of their presidents, but would the WSSS accept her program? Militancy had been its motto and the breath of its nostrils through all these troubled years. Since the outbreak of war, Flaming Fanny had busily sown the whirlwind, advocating fresh demonstrations in conjunction with a system of unlimited strikes. Woman must hold her hand, now that her help was needed. Man, the oppressor of all time, must be coerced by woman's flat refusal to take part in relief work, or work of any kind whatever, into yielding the withheld right. And Mrs. Clash sided with Fanny and others nearer home. Little wonder, then, that pressmen, sensing the imminence of riot, had turned out in their shabbiest tweeds and left their watches and tie-pins at home. Little wonder that medical students, who had not already joined the service, with betting men and patrons of the pugilistic prize ring, found themselves balked of anticipated entertainment, or that loafers and crooks, pickpockets, and rowdies, disappointed of a pleasurable evening, expressed themselves in unmeasured terms regarding that mass meeting at the royal hall. A melodious speaking voice can be a magical wand, wielded by the mouth of a plain woman. But when the woman is beautiful and intellectual, when soul breathes through her words, and strength and tenderness, then she becomes a force to reckon with, a power to move mountains and bring water of tears from the living rock of the hardest human heart. The officially checked lights of the hall shone down upon a sea of threatening faces. The electric battens over the speaker's head showed her to be a tall, fair, slender woman, dressed in filmy gray, veiling soft clinging silk of the same shade. The simplicity of her dress was unrelieved by ornaments other than a chain of pearls about her long throat. The red-brown hair seemed heavy for the little Greek head. The lovely pale face with the sensitive lips wore a look of patient sorrow. The eyes she turned upon the audience, a seething mixture of irreconcilable elements, had in them courage, sympathy and understanding, and knowledge too. Before she spoke, she had created an impression. Strangers were ingratiated by her beauty and evident refinement. Those who best knew her were among the wildest and most reckless there. They had quieted when she had risen up in her unnoticed corner of the platform and moved forwards to the speaker's place opposite the chair, as though oil had been cast upon the waters of a stormy sea. "When God willed this war that we call Armageddon," she had said to them, "for without the permission of the Most High, the earthly powers that planned and prepared it could not have plucked the fruit of their desire. It came in time to prevent the declaration of a war even more terrible. War, to the death, between woman and man." In a few trenchant words, she painted the dire results of such hostility. "That unnatural horror has been mercifully averted," she said to them. "The old sore is healed, there is no hatred nor rancor left. We women have learned what a price has to be paid for the franchise of manhood. It is the brave blood that is drenching the soil of Belgium and France and Poland, that will flow in rivers as wide as the Thames at Vauxhall Bridge before peace is proclaimed again. They have answered the call. They are pouring into the recruiting offices, in thousands of thousands, those who have given up their loved ones, their homes, their hopes of success in arts or sciences, professions or businesses or trades. Will women be as unselfish and as generous when their call comes? For it will come. It is coming while I stand here." They were strangely quiet, under the spell of the beautiful voice, and the eyes that were luminous and deep with tenderness. There are faithful Christians among you, brave, earnest souls who have prayed to God for guidance among the difficulties that beset the way for working women, and weaker souls have been maddened to frenzy and plunged into unbelief by the intolerance and the injustice, the shrieking wrongs and the unpurged evils that man, who enters upon his heritage the world, by the gate of motherhood, has ignorantly accumulated upon the shoulders of the sex he professes to respect. There was a murmur of approval at this. She lifted a hand, and they were silent. "I say to those who have despaired, despair no longer. I say to those who have prayed, your prayer is answered. Take up the work that has dropped from the hands that are busy with the rifle. Prove your right to the parliamentary franchise. Take your place amongst the world's workers for good and for all. The vote will be granted. It cannot be denied. But if you had it now, passionately as you desire it, and the choice were offered you, oh, my sisters, would you not yield it up with gladness to bring those dead men back to life again?" And after a pause of unbroken silence, she added, "For they have fought even better than they knew. They have reconquered woman. Freely and willingly as comrade and helper, she takes her place and her share of the burden. Peace is proclaimed. The war between the sexes is at an end." We know how truly the speaker prophesied. Quietly as the vast Atlantic flows into and fills a labyrinth of empty, echoing, rock caverns, the vast body of unemployed women took the places of the male workers called away to the front. They had clicked into the slots before the world was well aware of it, or they themselves understood that a miracle had been wrought. Said the breeched and gaitered lady conductor of a Northwest tram the other day. "Now the ones that was brought up active has got their chance to do a bit, and the ones that was brought up idle, Ave found out that they like work. Will they ever be content to sit and twiddle their thumbs again? I don't think." She clipped pink tickets with zeal, and when a red-nosed, watery-eyed elderly man who had offered her a pewter shilling cursed her venomously as she thrust the coin back on him. "Ere you, op it," she said to the offender, and caught him neatly by the scruff. hauled him down the corkscrew stairway, and deposited him in the Camden Road without turning a hair. Chapter 68 *. The Devil Egg. Von Herrnung had quitted the earth sober, to discover at the height of 1,000 meters that his potations had dulled his brain. As he ceased to climb and brought down the nose of the Taube to the level, he realized that he was dizzy, and that at the pit of his stomach squatted the aviator's deadly foe, the demon of nausea. He pictured it as a yellow, frog-like thing with frothing leathery lips and green eyes that squinted. This image vexed him and would not be driven away. He switched on the hawk hoverer and sensed the drag of the twin horizontal flanged screws against the thrust of the propeller, adding to its drone the vibration of the endless traveling chains running in their sheath of transparent talc. To make room for its long groove in the floor of the bird body, the thick glass port beneath the pilot's feet had been removed by the sergeant mechanic of the flight squadron. Now there were 2 ports, one on either side. Through these the German looked down upon the shell-pounded ruins of the village town, its roofless homes and broken enclosures giving the effect of a wild bee's nest laid open by the gardener's shovel after the gardener has smoked out the bees. As von Herrnung located the baker's house by aid of his recently acquired binoculars, another swirl of sickness took him, and he shuddered and spat bile over the side. Those distant voices of guns had not ceased their sullen calling. In the rose-flushed south towards which the Taube faced as it hovered above the ruins of the village, black columns of vapor swelled and towered, and acrid flashes stabbed through the murkiness. One should be there, his manlier self said to him. Better to be a brave German bird dodging death amongst the puffs of shrapnel, dropping devil eggs on the British batteries, winning back the forfeited cross and the lost imperial favor, than to be here, hanging like a carrion vulture over the maimed body of a dying man. Perhaps, but one had promised oneself revenge for the scorn that had stung like fire, and one had bragged to the English boy of what one meant to do. He looked back and called through the speaking tube that traversed the canvas overdeck between the pilot's seat and the passenger, S. Unstrap yourself and come to me and take the control stick. Schnell, do you hear? What is that you say? He put the voice tube to his ear and heard the shrill pipe answer through it. You think it best to tell me that you take back your parole? The big teeth grinned under the red mustache. All right, said the enemy. While we are in the air, you are free to jump out if you like and run away. When we get to the ground again, that is another matter. Come now, sit in front of me and take over the controls. And as the boy obeyed, creeping beneath the intervening deck and under the canvas partition, the enemy moved back upon the pilot seat, keeping his feet on the lower controls and separating his knees so as to leave a ledge for Bond to occupy. Still laughing, he took spare safety straps that hung on each side against the bulwarks and clipped the patent pneumatic studs to the belt that girt the boy. It did not do to run risks. Some day it might occur to the Emperor to order von Herrnung to deliver up his captive, and the little devil was useful, hellishly. He had come into the world, 12 years ago, possessed of the flying gift. He had taken to the air as naturally as a young crow or pigeon. A tap on the shoulder, a word shouted in his ear, and he knew what you wanted. He understood now why his overlord required the unrestricted use of his arms at this moment. The small hands twitched as they gripped the lever, and shudders convulsed the slender frame. Noting this, von Herrnung grinned. His qualms had left him for the present. He was once more master of his stomach and lord of his cool and steady brain. Through the back of his head the boy could see him, leaning his big body sidewise, craning his neck over the edge of the fuselage, his hand hovering over the bomb hanging near in its wire holder, his keen hard eyes calculating distance, his red brows knitted, his full mouth smiling under its thatch of red hair. The devil egg would burst upon its impact with a roof or with the ground, 1,000 meters under the Taube. How many times since the red dawning of the aggressor's day had he, von Herrnung, not plucked out the pin and lifted the latch, and sent death and destruction speeding earthwards? Why should this particular devil egg have exploded 5 seconds after its release? The detonating mechanism had been wrongly set, or the explosive had suffered some chemical deterioration. With the volcanic upburst of flaming gases and the fierce blizzard of rending steel splinters, the Taube was shot upwards like the cork from a bottle of champagne. The enemy had cut out the hovering gear when he had dropped the devil egg, and the thrust of the tractor had sent the Taube rushing on. Thus, though she had been bumped about on waves of rising gases, though daylight shone through holes in her wings and body. A wheel had dropped like a stone from her undercarriage, and a piece of her tail had gone fluttering and swerving earthwards. No serious damage had been done to the machine. Bond's cheek was bleeding from the scratch of a splinter, but he stuck manfully to the controls. "Steer south," he had been told, "when I switch off the hoverer," and he had waited, his teeth set, his brows knitted, his eyes on the compass, and his heart crying out to God to save his newfound friend. He knew it was because he had prayed so hard that the bomb had exploded prematurely. Would the enemy try again with the one that yet remained? But the enemy made no sign. One dared not look round or speak to him. Was he in a fit, or sick, or merely shamming? One could feel the big body heaving at one's back as it lay huddled against the canvas partition, with rolling head and arms spread wide, and knees that straddled and sagged. Jerk, the Taube heaved her afterpart as a cow gets up, and nose-dived. Von Herrnung's feet had slipped from the controls, and her rudder was flapping free. As Bond towed the bar and gripped the guide wheel and brought the keel to a level, the blood in his veins tingled and he knew a thrill of joy. One had borne a lot, but man alive. A moment like this was worth it. What Boy Scout could deny the greatness of this boy's reward? To be master of this giant bird, rushing at the speed of an express train over woods and fields and villages, diminished to the patches on a crazy quilt by the height at which one sped. To hear the shrill breeze harping in the wires and the roar of the flashing tractor, and change the din at a fingertouch to the silence of a glide. West, where the sun was setting in red fire, were signs by now familiar. Linked specks that were big gray German troop trains ran over the shining gossamer lines of the railways, going south. Where the shining lines looked like scattered pins, the railways had been blown up by the Belgians or the British. Things like caterpillars crawling over the white ribbons of the highways were German motor lorries dragging great howitzers, or army supply and transport, or marching columns of robust, bullet-headed German infantrymen. A blot of gray upon a town was where a division rested. Strings of gray spiders hurrying south would be brigades of cyclist telegraphists or sharpshooters, and processions of drab beetles scuttling along, field ambulances, or staff motorcars. One would have said that a green-gray blight had fallen upon Belgium, swiftly advancing, stayed by nothing, devouring as it moved. East, where the shadow of the Taube raced beside her like a carriage dog, black streaks that were barges still crawled on the canals, and peasants' carts crept over the roads, and there were no columns of troops in view, nor uglier tokens of the war. Though the red and brown towns showed scant signs of life, late root crops were being harvested. Plow teams were breaking up the stubbles, factory chimneys were smoking, and acres of linen web yet spread to bleach along the riverbanks. Later in the month, the gray-green blight was to sweep over all this region as the Boche retreated before the thrust of the 1st and 4th British Army Corps, from Houthulst Forest to Mennon-on-Leys. Those voices of the guns were nearer now. They talked on incessantly. You felt the air that carried you vibrating as you flew. The solid earth heaved up in waves under the dusty golden smoke drifts veiling the south horizon. Black pillars of smoke and debris climbed and collapsed against the dusty gold. Gray Imperial staff cars were parked in the courtyard of a shadow with pepperbox towers. Officers sat at tables on the vine-covered terrace, while a farm close by was doing duty as a casualty-clearing station. You could pick out the flutter of the Red Cross flag on a broken tree beside the gateway, and the come and go of the bearers carrying laden or empty stretchers, and the white armlets of the Sanitätskorps men who drove the ambulance cars. To have seen over and over again what grown folks learned from newspapers was to be a man seasoned in war, whilst yet one's bones were young. Well worth the hardships one had borne, this sheaf of ripe experience. Good to know one had obeyed the chief who said, "Quit yourself like a man." So Bond flew on. The fiery chrism of a strange second baptism was on his forehead. Gates of wonder seemed opening on the horizon towards which he hastened, guided by the big, broad arrow of the reinforced compass and the thudding of those nearing guns. Some perception of great issues at stake and marvelous impending changes, ushering in the revival of the forgotten days of chivalry, may have come at this hour to the child, so strangely caught and whirled into the dizzy circles of the maelstrom of international war. Did a voice whisper to him that as of old by his pagan forefathers, babes were sacrificed to Bel and Odin, so for the cleansing of the sick world of today from the war madness begotten by greed and materialism, a torrent of rich, warm, generous blood was to be shed from the veins of the young? Could he dream that the lower mankind sank, the higher men were to rise, mounting on stepping stones of obedience and courage, to those heights where the human may walk with the divine? That through long years to come, bright boys in myriads would drain the wine of death from the chalice of self-sacrifice, and pass to God, who kindled in those clean young souls the fire that made him burn to die for men. The enemy was rousing from his doze or dwam or swoon or whatever had been the matter with him. The big body was heaving into an upright posture. The big foot was knocking in Morse on the bottom of the fuselage. The boy looked down and saw blood running there, or was it the red of the sunset? "Shut off and look at me," rapped the foot, and its thrall obeyed and shrieked at the sight of the horror he was strapped to, glaring with wild eyes and spitting unintelligible sentences with bloody splinters of shattered teeth and red rags of palate and tongue. "I am damaged, is it not so? Something hit me when the bomb exploded." Something like this came in strange sounds from that inhuman face, and the boy shrieked again and again, straining at the belt that bound him to his terrible companion, conscious of nothing but overmastering fear. "Quit yourself like a man." He heard the words through the drumming in his ears, and his heart left off leaping. His brain cleared. He realized that the Taube was diving to the ground. He switched on power and brought down her tail and pulled up her nose gamely. They passed through a suffocating mist of burned chemicals that deposited red powder on your hands and face, and the glass of your flying goggles, and parched your lungs like burning cayenne pepper, and were over the battle zone. As far as the eye could take it in the face of Earth was moving. Death, like a many-handed mole, seemed working underground. Huge geysers of dirt and mud and stones heaved up in thick black smoke and vapor. The air shook incessantly with reduplicated concussions. Buildings tottered and sank away, and railway bridges melted, and spurts of blinding fire leaped from invisible mouths of guns. The revolutions were slowing down. The Taube traveled painfully. Beneath her bobbed a row of sausage-shaped observation balloons straining at their spidery cables. Beyond these were the 3rd and 2nd German lines, whitish furrows stretching east and west, with little zigzags that were communicating trenches between. A thin blue haze of rifle and machine gun fire hung over the pitted ground. The advanced lines behind their smear of rust-red, barbed wire might have been 60 yards from the parapet of the British trenches. Friend and foe were dying there, and over the hurly-burly, dodging death in puffs of woolly vapor, belched from vertical mobile muzzles, directing fire, signaling, wirelessing, scouting, fighting others who assailed signalers or scouters, wheeled and circled the birds of war. Their sharp eyes picked him out flying far down beneath them. "There goes a Hun somebody's schrapazzled," said the pilot of a RAFBE, shutting off to speak to his observer. "Going to crash in a minute," said the observer of the Blériot experimental. "Where, do you suppose?" "If he keeps on at that angle," said the pilot from behind his glasses, "he'll pass over that nest of Hun machine guns in the big shell pit behind the German advanced line, at about 150, and pile in that plowfield behind our gunners." The Taube was flying low and crookedly. The high crescendo whine of shell passed over it, heavy metal sent from German batteries, and other shells from British guns were crashing and bursting near. The wind was getting up in the west, and the drift of the machine was trending eastwards, in spite of anything Bonn could do. Could one keep flying long enough to pass the first line of British trenches? And how would one come to the ground, knowing nothing about landing, and with a bomb on board? One must get rid of the devil egg. Should one drop it on the enemy's trenches? As he flew towards them, a rag of white fluttered, and Bonn caught his breath. A long line of gray-green men were jumping like grasshoppers over the parapet. They went forwards with their hands up, waving a white flag, and from the British trenches came men in khaki doubling out to take their prisoners. Rat-tat-tat. The khaki figures began to fall. The gray men were cheering. The rat-tat came from the German machine guns, pumping out jets of murderous lead. Then in a flash Bonn understood, leaned to the right, and seeing the machine gun pit beneath him, pulled out the pin, jerked up the latch, and dropped the devil egg. Horrible to think it would kill Germans. But then, to save one's own dear Englishmen. "Good night, did you see that?" asked the pilot of the RAFBA, shutting off to address his observer, and immediately switching on again, for a geyser of earth and stones and fire. and bits of things that had been men and guns had spurted up from the spot where a moment since had been the gun pit, and troubled waves of heated air reached them at 5,000. He knows he's got to come down crash and jettison the lollipop to improve his chances. Civil of him to drop it just when the Deershires were getting it hot and hot. Deserves thanks from the British C&C, though his Kaiser won't be particularly pleased with him, reflected the RFC. Observer, as the Taube, flying like a bird with a wounded wing, crossed the lines of the British trenches, dived staggeringly, and crashed down in the plowed field behind the slogging guns. Chapter 69 ***. A menace and good news. Drip, drip. The slow dropping of water on the carpet and the sweet, heavy fragrance of roses brings me back as it brought Patrine. She got up and pulled down the dark blue blinds with the precaution that was becoming habitude with us at this date, in view of that often bragged of menace from the sky. She switched up the lights and moved to the table, roughly pulled off the string that tied, and lifted the lid of the cardboard box. A rich, sweet fragrance that was almost musky enveloped her as she lifted the thin paper. A sheaf of roses of flaming sanguine crimson, tied with black and white striped ribbon lay beneath. Black and white are the Prussian colors. Black, white, and red the standard of the Hohenzollern. Patrine knew that von Herrnung had sent the roses, even before she recognized his writing on a thick white envelope pinned to the ribbon binding the flowers. If Isis desires news of her dearest, she will open and read the letter, from one who does not desire to forget. The letter contained a lock of hair, jaggedly cut, she knew from whose sweet head. Half blind with tears, she lifted the lock to her lips and kissed it passionately, before she bent herself to read the careful English sentences that revealed the man in all his vanity and lustfulness, insolence, and tyranny, as though the burin of Strang or the brush of Sargent had etched him upon copper or limned him upon canvas, to show the world what depths of infamy can be plumbed by the Superman. Strong woman of the race of moral weaklings, have you not yet learned to be proud that a Prussian soldier prized your beauty and took it for his own? When the fierce men in the proud German field grey have swarmed over the soil of England, when, amidst the squadron of night birds whose feathers gleam mysteriously in the pale moonlight, thy lover flies onward, singing his war song, laden with his cargo of explosives. When the red cock crows on the roof trees of London's wilderness of houses and London's fire bells, amidst terrific explosions, ring out the last battle of the century, will Isis then think of me? Revolvers, carbines, bombs, and poisoned arrows are among the gifts I shall bring thee in the hand that wears the mascot pearl of black and white. Colored signaling balls set in the silver of the searchlight shall be thy tiara. For thy arms and thy white bosom there will be strings of rubies outpoured from the broken coffers of the House of Life. Our second nuptials will be celebrated by a mitred death amidst the smoking ruins of Westminster Abbey to the roaring strains of the German anthem, Now praise ye the Lord. Till then, au revoir, shall one perhaps say. Ah, were Isis of the burning beechleaf tresses not only beautiful but wise, she would place her hand in the hand that stretches yearningly over the North Sea. I wish love more than vengeance. Is not that unnatural for a Hun? A golden consciousness of happiness yet to come wells up within me. Would Isis taste that happiness, let her go to her window and open it on the night of the day that brings this letter. There are no Germans in England who are not in prison or under espionage. No, possibly. Yet go to thy window, a word to him who waits there, and Isis is once more mine. But beware of turning my tenderness by scornful rejection to hatred. Cold devil, I should then strike, and frightfully, at the head whence came this hair. Look at it well and answer. T.V.H. She could turn no paler, her hue was that of death already. She dropped the loathsome letter from her hand upon the roses and thrust the lock of hair into her bosom, and went to a window and touched the spring of the blind. It flew up and revealed her tall shape standing there silhouetted against the electric radiance in defiance of that boasted menace from the sky. The street seemed empty within the radius of her vision, save for the dark bulk of a motor car standing before a house on the same side some way down. Its headlights flashed once, twice, and again as though in answer. It slid forwards with a low hissing sound. "SS," it said, as if in gluttonous anticipation, and stopped opposite the hall door. Again the headlights flashed, there was a gleam of yellow enamel. She recognized the derrick car, in which von Herrnung had driven her to Fanshaw's flying ground on that unforgettable 18th of July. holding her breath, narrowing her long-sighted eyes for better focus. She scrutinized the driver, recognizing in the thick-set figure hunched over the steering wheel, wearing a peaked cap pulled low over his forehead, and a wide white muffler twisted round his throat, the German who had brought the message from the three in the blue Fiat car. She was sure of him when he touched his cap, looking furtively up at the window, and switched on a small electric bulb, illuminating the clock upon the dashboard as though to afford her a view of his face. Its bloodshot pale eyes, thick broad nose, and the unwholesome, purplish color of the complexion, barred with a big light yellowish mustache with waxed ends, had stuck in her memory as ugly personal traits will stick. Of the slenderer man beside him, she had no recollection. He was buttoned up in an overcoat with a fur collar, and wore a soft felt hat. She felt the eyes it shadowed were fastened on her, and recoiled as though from the touch of something unclean and horrible, roughly dragging down the blind. She was brave, but the sense of being almost alone in the house with those alert, observant eyes outside, spying upon her movements, made her heart beat suffocatingly, and brought chill damps of deadly terror to the surface of her skin. She moved to a chair with a clogging sense of ultimate effort, the nightmare feeling of striving against a powerful hypnotic influence, bidding her creep downstairs and open the street door, step into the car waiting at the curbstone, and be borne away by rushing wheels and whirling screws, or even swifter wings perhaps, to that war-torn land where von Herrnung was waiting to exact his price for sparing the beloved head. She drew the lock of hair from her bosom and whispered inarticulate tendernesses to it, stroking its red-gold beauty with fingers and lips. Not until now those bred white strands amongst the reddish gold conveyed their sinister meaning. When it came, it was like a blow delivered full between the eyes. She swayed forwards and fell upon her knees beside the table, her forehead resting on the clenched hand that held the boy's hair. All that was maternal in her fierce, undisciplined nature urged her now to make the sacrifice. Remorse for having forgotten the child in her absorbing love for Sherbrand was a scourge of fiery scorpions that urged her to the leap. Its uselessness, the certainty that von Herrnung would keep no hinted promise to restore the hostage, would have been no argument to deter her. Sherbrand's influence might have counterpoised, but she had sent away Sherbrand for his own sake. Now she would go to Bonn, buy him back with body and soul, if need be, from the hands of the torturer, or at least share his agony and die by his side. Madness was near enough that night to sweep her tattered robe before the eyes of Patrine and beckon enticingly with her scepter of plaited straw. She was alone, and she had borne so much, and nothing else could save Lynette's boy, unless it were a miracle. Where was God? Where was God now? Upon that July night of the child's spiriting away, Sherbrand had bidden her pray that Bonn might be restored to them. She had petitioned in a perfunctory way when she had thanked God for taking away von Herrnung, that the child might be traced and brought back. Now she clenched her hands until the nails dug into their palms, and groaned out, as the dry sobs racked her body, words that sensed after this fashion. Save him, for Christ's love save him and give him back, for the dear sakes of those to whom I have been so ungrateful. Hear me, only hear me, and I will be different. I will serve thee, O God, who have ignored thee. I will confess thee, I who have denied. Mean, base, said her pride, to kneel and entreat him whom you have neglected and insulted. Even though he heard, do you think that he would answer now? But with desperate effort she thrust away the thought from her. The hound of heaven had leaped upon her, flying. She felt his teeth in her garments, holding her back from the invisible hands that dragged at her. She knew that unseen forces of good and evil were engaged in furious battle for her soul. And strangling, she gasped out incoherent sentences, wild appeals to the divine pity. In the midst of these, startling her like a thunderclap, came a hurried knocking at the door. "Miss Pat." It was the voice of Mrs. Keese, and as Patrine stumbled to her feet and stood wild-eyed and shaking, the little matronly figure in the black silk gown of housekeeperly dignity appeared upon the threshold of the room. "You wanted me, Mrs. Keese. Is it about the yellow car? Have they?" The hoarse voice and the white, wrung face conveyed to an ardent lover of Patrine that something was wrong with her doctor's niece. Tragedy was in the air, but discretion is the better part of value, and nobody knew better than Emregation Jane what fierce passions could boil in the Saxon blood. "No, Miss Pat, it's not the car yet, though I fancied I eared one stop here a minute back. It's the telephone in the consultant room ringin' and ringin', and Chu's gone to bed. Chu's being the trained maid who admitted patients and received messages. And me with the best will in the world never could make eed or tale of them teller messages, except the ullowing, and perhaps you'd come and write down for the doctor whatever it is they've got to say. Very well, don't wait, I'm coming directly. Mrs. Keese vanished, and with that dreamlike sense of unreality upon her, Patrine followed downstairs and passed along the silent corridor. The electric lamp above the doctor's table had been switched on. She took the doctor's chair and rang up and waited, sitting where Saxem had sat when Lynette's sweet lips first touched his forehead, where the big man had planned self-murder in the darkest hour of his despair. The frayed patch on the Persian rug beneath her feet had been worn by Saxem's usage. The triptych frame that held the portraits of Lynette and Bon drew Patrine's eyes as she sat waiting, and the clench of her big white hand upon the table ledge, the bend of her black brows, and the stern sorrow stamped upon her face made her likeness to the doctor more than ever apparent now. "Halloa," she called, and the brusque harshness of her own voice was startlingly like Saxem's. A sense of destiny oppressed her. She felt as one stifling in a vacuum, drowning for lack of air. Her prayers had rolled back upon her soul unanswered. The sense of spiritual desolation intensified her desperate loneliness. No good to pray and cling until you broke your nails to that great rock that upholds the crucifix. Better let go and be carried away by the torrent. Signs and wonders are not wrought in these days, said that other Patrine within Patrine, and if any were, there would be no miracle. You fool, to dream of one. She was sorry for herself as she sat there waiting. This little duty done, she would rise and obey that sinister summons from the outer darkness. Nothing on earth nor in heaven could help or prevent. The sudden tinkle of the bell came at this juncture. The call was in Sir Rowland's well-known voice. "Halloa, is that you, Saxem?" "Halloa," she called back in that voice so strangely like his and unlike her own. "Good, well, my true friend and faithful coadjutor of old time," said the crisp voice, shaken a little as though by some irrepressible emotion or excitement. "Some news has been communicated to us by wireless that will lift up your heart and your wife's. Are you listening? Today about 6 p.m., near Langebec, northwest of Ypres, at the moment of the white flag ruse that cost the Deershire Regiment 200 men, a two-seater Taube, flying low, as though something were the matter with her engine, came wobbling over the British lines. Nobody shot at her. She had just given our side sufficient reason for consideration by dropping a highly effective bomb on a wasp's nest of German machine gunners, and she crashed to ground behind a battery of 1st Corps RFA. Her German pilot had been frightfully wounded. His passenger, who sat in his lap to steer and dropped the bomb, escaped with a shake-up. You've got the story? Then, here's the tag of it. We've got your boy. Bon was the lucky fellow who only got a shaking. He arrives at Charing Cross tonight at 12 sharp. He added, as a stifled cry traveled over the wire. Congratulations with all my heart, to you and Mrs. Saxem. And to Miss Pat, though I'm afraid she pays, poor girl, in sorrow for your joy. There is a report that Sherbrand's bird of war No. 2 has been shot down by a Zeppelin he encountered returning to the front from England today to supply the place of an RFC pilot, killed while on observation service near St. Yves for Callanby's Cavalry Corps. There was a stifled sound of interrogation or an exclamation. The chief continued. He had no bombs. It was madness to attack with only a Maxim and their magazine revolvers, but glorious madness worth 1,000 sane, reasonable acts. As it is, the Zeppelin, supposed to have been on her way from Ostend to bomb Saint-O, was badly crippled and compelled to turn back. It was a shell from one of her QF. That exploded Sherbrand's petrol tank and set the bird on fire. The machine was seen to fall in flames near Dixcoot, held by the Germans. Sherbrand and his observer must be prisoners, that is, supposing they're alive. Hard luck. Break it gently to the poor girl. Good night. There was no answering good night, only a faint thud and rustle. Sir Rowland did not guess what he had done as he rang off and hung the receiver up. And Lynette, coming into the consulting room, noiselessly as a pale moonbeam, found a big galumphing girl she loved lying huddled between the chair and table, with her white face pressed against the spot worn threadbare by the doctor's feet. Coincidence, you say, perhaps. Well, but what is coincidence? Is it a dust wind careering over the desert in the neighborhood of the pyramids, playing with straw and twigs and dead locusts, wings, and one stray fragment of printed paper, as a mounted division of the British Expeditionary Force encamped upon the slope not far from Gizeh, ride out with the dawn to exercise their horses on the plain that is partly flooded by the Nile. Or is it the ragged quarter sheet torn from an English newspaper that wraps itself about the spurred ankle of the big blonde young Englishman who rides the vicious chestnut mare? Long lines of horses marching in threes for miles, black and coffee-colored natives in flowing jubbes mixed up with tanned young British centaurs in sun helmets and khaki shorts, and the rag of paper clings to the leg of the one man there whom its news concerns. She who is dearer than all save honor is once more a free woman, and his faith and constancy are to meet their reward. His letter lies before me. A sentence penciled more blackly than the rest stands out upon the yellowish paper. If this be accident, it is incredible. If design, it is miraculous, and I had rather thank heaven for a miracle vouchsafed than owe even such happiness to chance. When the deep swoon gave place to semi-consciousness, the pale lips uttered nothing but broken words. Locked away safely behind them was the glorious news that would have changed two people's lives. Thus Lynette was still ignorant of her own great happiness, when having helped Patrine upstairs to her room and put her tenderly to bed, she dismissed Mrs. Keese to her own slumbers, and took her place beside Patrine's pillow, listening to the sighing breaths that were growing deeper and fuller, keenly alert for the sound of the doctor's latchkey and the doctor's step in the hall. It was close upon the smallest hour. Something had detained Saxam. Sitting in the darkened room beside the long prone shape beneath the coverings, Lynette was free to lean her head against the back of the chair she sat in and yield herself to the bitter sweetness of memories of her lost boy. What the sorrow of Shakespeare wrought in deathless lines, no halting pen like mine dare strive to portray. Enough that the beloved little ghost that haunted the woman whose heart was breaking was closer than ever to Lynette on this night. All day the sweet obsession had thrust itself between Bond's mother and solid, tangible things. The red-gold sheen of the boyish head, the gay blue challenge of the laughing eyes, the coaxing tones of the treble voice had tortured the senses they deceived. She had thrust him away with both hands, for ordinary, commonplace duties claimed, and yielding led the way to madness. He had come back again and again, to be driven away once more. Now that her hands lay idle in her lap, now that she was withdrawn from the world and its realities, the beloved little ghost returned and had his will with her. Sitting in the haunted gloom, a strange conviction came to Lynette. This was not grief, travestying in the figure of the absent, but a visitation from the world unseen. Bon was dead, and had been dragged back from the threshold of the beyond by her own unbridled yearnings. Could there be a punishment more terrible than this? Only those who have loved and lost, and clinging to their faith in a future life, strive to bear patiently the burden of bereavement, can comprehend the torture of this woman in this hour. The presence grew more torturingly tangible. The empty shell of the house that had been Bond's home was full of his callings, his movements, his play, his laughter. She heard his quick, soft breathing behind her chair in the darkness. Once she could have vowed that a hard little boyish hand brushed against her cheek. Then she was alone once more, except for the unconscious sleeper. And then the torture began all over again. Bon was coming home late from the Hendon flying ground. The long months of misery, the horror of the war, had been a dreadful dream. She heard the long bearer of the electric hall bell under the impetuous, insistent finger, the small scurry of his entrance, a squawk from the maid who answered night calls, a whispered word or two, and the clumping of the heavy little brogues upon the stairs. Would he trip at the corner where he always stubbed his toe? She wondered, and she plainly heard him stumble. Then her hair stiffened upon her head, and a long shudder rippled through her. The little clumping brogues had stopped before Patrine's bedroom door. "Mother!" His voice called, and his well-known thump came on the door panel. The handle clicked. She controlled her shuddering and forced her stiffened tongue to speech. "Come in, my own." The tall door swung slowly inwards. A wedge of brightness from the lighted landing through his shadow over the white enameled doorpost. The darkness of the room soaked it greedily up. Then the doorway was a square of radiance with a little ghostly figure framed in it. All the light was behind him. She could not see his face, but she felt his eyes upon her. Then the voice that her ears were sick for said with a quaver in its treble. "It's dark, but I can hear you breathing. Mother, why didn't you and Father come? I thought when I got there I'd be sure to see you. But amongst all those faces and faces not one was yours, and man alive. I wanted to blub a bit. I'm not quite sure that I didn't. She stretched her arms to the beloved little ghost, whispering, "My poor, poor love, my baby, my treasure. Mother knows how much it hurt, but be patient a little longer. Soon, soon, your father and I." The woe wave rose and swelled in her bosom. Tears began to run over her stiff, white face. The clasped hands she stretched to him were quivering, but she controlled them like the trembling of her voice. "Go back to paradise, my little son. Wait patiently, my love, my angel. I have been wrong, but I will grieve no more. I will be patient. Oh, believe." A man's footsteps sounded on the staircase, and the great shadowy figure of the doctor appeared behind Bond's little shape. With a swift movement, Saxem caught up the bewildered boy, made one long stride across the threshold, and put the warm, living treasure into the mother's outstretched arms. Once again, big black-lettered contents bills shrieked from the railings and were worn after the fashion of heralds, tauberds by the vendors of newspapers, and the editions were snapped up as fast as they came out. Here are some of the headlines. Thrilling escape of kidnapped Boy Scout from the hands of the Hun. Young hero of North Sea adventure lands behind British lines at Langebec in Taube with a Boche prisoner. Full story of how Scout, who saved the Clanronald papers, bombed the German machine guns. Decoration of Scout Saxem with Golden Wolf badge by Royal President at Association headquarters. Probable testimonial from British public. Afternoon tea with the War Minister at Whitehall. Expected investiture with Edwardian Order of Merit. What you get by being prepared. And again. Splendid pluck of British aviator. Fights Zeppelin on way to bomb British headquarters. Airship crippled. Sherbrand RFC. Killed. Falls in flames over German lines. Heroic end of soul remaining heir to Peninsular War earldom and inventor of the hawk hoverer that solves problem of stability. Will War Office adopt great invention employed by Allies flying services. 3 days later. Sherbrand RFC. Receives posthumous honors from France and Belgium, Croix d'Honneur and Order of Leopold. Why not British DSO? Chapter 70. A Lover's Journey. The crossing, in this Arctic April weather when all of Britain and Belgium and northwest France lay under snowdrifts, had been calm and smooth enough for the worst sea stomachs on the steamer. The tall young woman in the navy blue felt hat with the well-known VAD ribbon, and the long blue serge coat with the Red Cross shield badge on the left breast seemed used to traveling alone in wartime. She had secured a dry chair, set in the shelter of the afterdeck saloon, and a lifebelt as stipulated by the authorities, and tucked herself in her traveling rug with her suitcase under her feet before the lights went out. Thus she had remained throughout the passage, with her dark eyes looking seawards, as deaf to occasional bursts of uproarious song from a draft of returning blighties packed on the lower deck, as to the sirens' raucous shrieks. Courteous fellow passengers, chiefly British and Belgian officers returning from leave, would have been ready enough to have chatted with the young woman who was going to the front. Such attentions as they offered her she accepted frankly. One got her tea and sandwiches, another offered chocolate, another a foot warmer. Yet another insisted on lending her an unnecessary extra rug. They pointed out the hovering fleet hydroplanes, and the diligently scouting searchlights of the destroyers guarding the seaway, and the hull-bound Dutch liner whose neutrality was proclaimed in illuminated side letters, blazing like a seal hambra upon the east horizon, and the hospital ship that passed close, coming from Boulogne laden with wounded, the huge Red Cross upon her flank picked out with blazing green lights. One and all united in assuring the wearer of the VAD uniform that there was no danger. Though when the red and green eyes on the ends of the east and west jetties winked into sight over the coal-black shining water, her fellow passengers congratulated Patrine as heartily as though some peril had been escaped. "Nothing more doing, Pinkham's old thing," said an experienced youngster of 20 to a susceptible senior whom Patrine's unprotected condition had roused to a strong sense of responsibility. "She's got enough passes from British and French headquarters to make a poker hand. I saw her showin' 'em to the authorities at Folkestone. Besides, have heart, there's a red tab here to meet her. We'd better hence it before we're snubbed." And they saluted and clattered down the crowded gangway, grabbing their valises and buttoning up their British warms, and hurried away to get into trench kit, webbings, and waiters, and swell the crowd in the railway station. waiting to go up to the front and carry on with the hourly, momentary game of touch and go with death. While Patrine looked eagerly about her, listening to the hum of the vast human beehive. This was not the big, rambling, old-fashioned French seaport one had known so well before the war. Under sky-blind arc lights and red, green, and white lamps, every form of activity imaginable in connection with the running of that now huge and complicated machine, the British Field Army, seemed even at this hour to be in full swing. The rumble of steam cranes and the roar of dynamos, the panting of pneumatic hold-dischargers, the clank of couplings, and the shrieks of locomotives mingled with the tinny voices of gramophones from the recreation rooms at the great packed barracks and crowded camps, and the sounds of song and laughter and applause from music halls and picture palaces. "Yes, it goes on most of the time," said the red tab who had come to meet Patrine, an officer upon the staff of the commandant of a headquarters not far from a certain place where Miss Saxham wished to go. The armies got to be rationed and equipped and horsed and foraged, and timbered and coaled and petroled and munitioned, as well as cobbled and engineered and patched and tinkered and nursed. Don't you follow me? And these base ports are jolly useful. Nobody goes to bed much, I fancy. Perhaps they'll make up the sleep they've lost by and by, after the war. What ho, Nubbins, back from the old shop? Sorry, didn't happen to see you weren't alone. The station had vomited a flood of khaki, tumbling down the half-lit quays to take later boats by storm. A tall, lanky officer of gunners had hailed Red Tab effusively, then, seeing him to be engaged with a lady, hurried on with apologies and a salute for Patrine. "Don't mind me, do call back your friend," she urged. "He seemed so glad to see you." "Thanks much if you don't mind, whew-whip, whew-whip." And the other, recalled by a shrill whistle, wheeled and came back upon his stride to grasp the offered hand. Whereupon ensued the following strictly private duologue. "How goes the battery?" "First class, and your crowd?" "Crawling along as per usual. Congrats on the Outstide affair." "Thanks frightfully, but the whole thing was a bit of a fluke, everyone knows that. They had thrown down a gas attack and the wind went about face. So we stayed where we were and shelled them through their chlorine. Then they got their reserves up and came on in lumps, the old Zulu formation, and Pyers and his engineers got to work with the speaker's voice dropped to an undertone, what Pyers calls the piff-bozzler. "The Rose by any other name," quoted Red Tab and went on, "I'd have given a tenner to have been there. And as for old Clanronald, I wonder if he got leave from wherever he is to see the stunt that day." Said the gunner, "If he did and had such a thing as a stomach about him, he must have simply vomited. Pyers says he felt like the angel with the flaming sword when he didn't feel like an Indian jeweler with a blowpipe, frizzling a column of white ants marching over the floor. You've seen how the things come on and on." "Yog," remarked Red Tab expressively. "But, just for once, we didn't happen to be on the frizzled side. The INC has laughed to the verge of hysterics over a leader in the Berlin local Anzeiger, with reference to the realized dream of the homicidal maniac, Clanronald. A deplorable example of the perversion of Die Wissenschaft at the murderous hands of English military chemists, they called it. Pretty neat from Boches who have been pumping burning paraffin into our trenches and suffocating platoons of men with asphyxiating gases ever since May. And particularly appropriate from people who bribed a crack professor of literature to engage as librarian at Gwill Castle, set the library wing on fire and steal the portfolio with the plans of the homicidal maniac 3 weeks before the war, when Prince Heinrich and Old Molk were stopping in London. They'd promised their agent 12 million marks if he succeeded. Wonder what he got from them when the plot fizzled out? Well, so long. Any message for Edith? Tell her you saw me topping, and remember me to your wife. And they gripped hands and parted, and Red Tab hurried back to the tall young woman waiting on the flagstones under a blue-shaded arc lamp, saying, "Good of you not to mind, but a shame to keep you waiting. No, we go out at this gate. I've got a car waiting. More cushy than a crowded railway carriage, unless you'd have preferred going by train." The gray landaulet waiting in the side street presented no more unusual feature than unusually heavy armored tires, and a guard of razor-edged steel bars protecting the front seat. "In case of barbed wire strung across country roads," explained Red Tab, "one runs a chance of getting decapitated, traveling fast at night, or in foggy weather without a jigger of this sort. Let me stick this cushion at your back and tuck the rugs about you. There's a thermos in the pocket with hot coffee and sandwiches in a box. Don't restrain your pillows if you feel at all hungry. The grub was put in specially for you. No, you won't hear the guns yet except at intervals and rather faintly. Fact, I've heard 'em in the south of England more distinctly than one does here. But at St. O, 28 miles from the front, they're loud enough at times, though there's nothing much doing. Things have been as dull as ditch water, and none of us'll be sorry when the Boches get a move on again. No, thanks, I'm not coming inside, responsible for your safety. Advise you to tuck up and go to bye-bye. The car settled into its speed when the ups and downs of the old town had been left behind, and the belated activities of the baseport had died into a distant hum. It slackened pace when the blaze of its headlights showed long black columns of laden motor lorries upon the wintry roads ahead of it, or horse-drawn transport wagons, or droves of animals, the steam of whose breath and shaggy hides hung over them in a cloud, or bodies of men in heavy marching order, French and British soldiers wearing the new steel headpiece, shaped after the fashion of Mambrino's helmet, like a basin turned upside down. And sometimes there were the halts at barriers or patrol posts near towns or villages, where the light of swung lanterns reddened the moustached faces of gendarmes of chasseurs. But usually when Patrine cleared a space upon the misty window glass, the snow-covered landscape would be flying past under the fitful moonlight, with the elongated shadow of the gray staff car galloping beside it like a demon dog. Midnight was striking from an ancient church tower when, passing the guarded barriers of a town of old-world houses, and stopping in a street running from a place bathed in frosty moonlight and dominated by a vast cathedral, Red Tab, with icicles on his clipped mustache and fur collar, got down and tapped upon the rimy glass. "Sorry to wake you up, Miss Saxam," he said, opening the door as Patrine sat up, straightened the dented brim of her hat and blinked denial of her slumbrousness. "But here's the end of your journey. This is the Ursuline Convent of St. O, where we've arranged for you to billet tonight. The superioress is a frightfully hospitable old lady, and my uncle, I mean Sir Rowland, thought you'd be more cushy with the sisters than at a common hotel. Sir Rowland is always kind. But you, Captain Smythe-Howell?" She looked out at her red-tabbed escort with compunction as he tugged at the chain of a clanging bell and beat his mittened hands together, stamping upon the pavement to warm his frozen feet. "Me? Oh, I'm pushing on to divisional headquarters, 25 miles from this place and 5 miles north of the Belgian frontier. You'll be sent on to Poufril in the morning first thing. The French chaplain of the Red Cross Hospital there is staying for the night with the bishop at the palace here. A tremendously agreeable old bird, the chaplain, and a Monsignor of the Vatican. I've met him, and he said he'd be delighted to look after you. Don't get down, it's frightfully slippery." But the tall, womanly figure was already standing beside him on the snowy cobblestones, tilting a round white chin towards the sky and narrowing long eyes. Queer eyes, he mentally termed them, to see the better through her veil. What glorious stars! He liked the soft warmth of her voice as he answered. "Magnificent, aren't they? Look at Draco blazing away high over the north transept of the cathedral, and that would be Aquila, I rather fancy, lowish on the horizon, over that ruined tower. That's a bit of their famous abbey." "Great Scott! Did anything startle you?" he asked. "You said." "I know I said it, but I didn't mean to. There, again?" She pointed as forked tongues of pale rainbow-tinted fire leaped up from the northern horizon, throwing into momentary relief the cathedral's stately bulk and the huddled housetops. "Those are Boche fireworks." "Fireworks? Starshell, rockets, and so forth. They regularly treat us to a display before they begin to pound us again. Where are we fighting? Oh, pretty busy north, as far as Ypres and as far south as La Bassée. French on our right, French and Belgians on the left of us. More French holding Verdun. My hat, what gorgeous fighters. Men of steel with muscles of vulcanized rubber. And we thought the Gaul an absinthe-drinking degenerate. I tell you we wanted this war to open our eyes for us. Perhaps they did too. Here's one of the sisters coming now." Hurrying felt slippers with rope soles shuffled over stone pavements. The key grated and the bolts shot back. A little sister portress in a close gimp and flowing black veil, with a blue-checked apron tied over her habit, swung back the heavy door, holding her lantern high. Just heaven, upon how cold a night Madame had arrived from England, Madame must be perished. But there was coffee, and soup trays show not only for Madame but for l'officier. And also the chauffeur. Madame la Supérieure would never permit that either should proceed without nourishment. If l'officier and his attendant preferred not to enter, the sister would wait upon them in the car. And so Patrine, after taking leave of her red-tabbed escort, was led away to the Mother Superior. A little, bright-eyed, kindly religious, full of solicitude for Mademoiselle, who, confessing to having emptied a thermos of hot coffee and a box of sandwiches during the later stages of the transit, was borne away from the guests' refectory up and down several crooked flights of ancient stairs to a whitewashed apartment containing a prie-dieu and a big plaster crucifix. A great walnut bed with faded directoire curtains, a minute washstand, a faint smell of scorched wood emanating from the perforated metal registers of a calorifer, and a bad little colored print of Lord Roberts, within a stitched border of yellow immortelles and faded laurel leaves, that had been green and fresh 6 months before. Patrine spent a white night in the town where the old brave heart of the great soldier had given its last throb for England. Not because those thudding guns in the north and east kept her wakeful, or because she had never stayed in a convent before. She was going to Sherbrand, her flying man, who had been supposed to be dead and found to be living, and who had written to say that he did not want Patrine. The letter lay against her heart, and her hands were folded tightly over it, as she lay staring with shining eyes at the drawn curtains flapping in the chill breeze, stinging through the open window that had been fastened with a nail when the English guest arrived. Chapter 71 *. Living and Dead. Pathetic echo of air tragedy. Sherbrand, RFC, not dead or prisoner, rescued by American Red Cross ambulance. In hospital near Ypres, will recover but blind for life. The clamorous headlines had followed close on a telephone from Sir Roland. Patrine had learned what it means to cry for joy, an unforgettable experience. She had discovered that one who kneels down to thank God for a boon so marvelous has no words left to offer him, nor even tears and sighs. She had written again and again to Sherbrand, saying only, "Let me come to you." Passionate, pitiful, tender letters, answered after weeks of delay by one page in the stiff, neat handwriting of the American Red Cross nursing sister who acted as amanuensis for the blind man. April 1915. You have said that you wish to visit me in my blindness. I thank you for the expressed desire, but I cannot receive you here. I have never been the kind of man who bid for pity from women, and the ties that you broke, voluntarily, 6 months ago, I do not wish to renew. My mother has been here to bring me some things, the French and Belgian decorations, guessed Patrine, and has gone away again. She understands that it is best for me to remain here, because, although the war is over as far as I am actively concerned, I can hear the guns and breathe the breath of battle, and know when the planes pass overhead and follow them in thought. There is little else a blind man can do except make toys or baskets. Do not think me bitter or discontented. I am neither, quite okay. I wish people had been told I brought down the Zepp. That's all, with gratitude for your kind and friendly remembrance. Yours most sincerely, A.S. A formal letter, but between the cold, stiff lines Patrine had read reproach and love and yearning. An unkind letter, but could she judge him harshly, her poor blind eagle, sitting in darkness never to be lifted, listening to the guns and the battle song of the birds of war drifting down out of his sky. There was Mass in the convent chapel at 7 next morning. A military chaplain offered the divine sacrifice, and the rush-bottomed chairs were occupied by soldiers, French chasseurs and zouaves, Senegalese and Negroes, English guards and Irish fusiliers, Highlanders and a German or two. All patients from the hospital under the management of the Ursuline sisters, a big building next door to the convent that had been a young ladies' boarding school in the days before the war. The chapel was a dusky place. So dusky that though the red carnations and white Eucharist lilies in the altar vases struck vivid notes of color in the light of the altar candles, the ruby spark of the sanctuary lamp and the bright flame of the Paschal candle were barely visible in the brooding gloom. You could only tell the place to be crowded by the deep-toned chorus of masculine voices joining fervently in the Confiteor and Credo. Pale green flashes momentarily lit up the crimson and purple and tawny tracery of the round east window, and the distant thudding of the guns at the front made an accompaniment to the sacred rite. The French priest officiating was a lean, short, elderly personage with brilliant eyes set in a mask of walnut-brown wrinkles, and a resonant voice that was illustrated by beautiful, illuminating gestures as he preached. "Let none say in your hearing, unrebuked, that this war is an unrelieved misfortune," he said to his hearers. "Recognize with me, my French compatriots, the divine mercy as extended particularly to France in this fiery ordeal. Her towns and villages have been destroyed. Her buildings have been shattered, her sons in countless thousands slain, but her national character has been purified. The soul of her people has been raised from the mire. If there is one here present among you, whatever may be his nationality, who is conscious of loving virtue better and loathing vice more intensely since the beginning of this war, then the war has been a blessing to him and not a curse. Acts have been performed and are repeated hourly, acts of a sublime and touching selflessness and an almost divine tenderness, not only by men and women who are mild and gentle, but by the roughest and the most abandoned of either sex. The good seed was sown in time of peace. Ah yes, my children, but it might have perished. And now our Lord, who loves flowers, has caused these pure and exquisite blossoms to spring for him from the field of war." After his tiny sermon, delivered in French and repeated in English, he hesitated a moment before turning to the altar and said, with emotion in his mobile face and quick utterance, "I have to ask a favor of you this morning. It is that at the commemoration of the departed you will unite with me in a mental act of prayer. Prayer for the soul of one to whom the gift of faith, not being sought, was not given. A soul that has passed forth in darkness into the presence of him who is the light." He turned away and began the credo. As the deep chorus of male voices followed, Patrine found herself agreeing with the preacher's discourse. "What was it," she asked herself, "that led me out from overheated, crowded rooms, oppressive with the scent of flowers and perfumes of triple extract, where the tango and the turkey trot were being danced by half-clad, painted women and effeminate young men, and set my feet upon a mountain slope with the free winds of heaven blowing upon me? I must answer, it was the war." As the great waves of the credo surged and beat against the old brown rafters, she went on thinking. "What has made me quicken to the call of humanity, awakened me to the knowledge of my sisterhood with my fellow women? What has taught me how to live without dissipation and do without useless luxuries? Again, the war. And oh, what has taught me the meaning of love in all its fullness, and set within the shrine of my heart this great sacred sorrow, and kindled in my soul the pure altar flame of faith? The war, the terrible war." She prayed for Sherbrand at the commemoration of the living, a somewhat incoherent petition that her flying man might be helped to bear his blindness and find some happiness in her unchanged love, and the thought of the dead agnostic haunted her. Who was the man, and what had brought about his ending? Was he a patient in the Ursuline hospital? A French, an English, or a German soldier? By a subtle change in her mental purview, recollections of von Herrnung began to occupy her mind. "I will not think of him. I will not," she said to herself desperately. Then the obsession assumed an acute form. All that she most wished to forget in her relations with the Kaiser's flying man was being revived in her memory. Scene by scene, sentence by sentence, she was forced to live over the hated past again. She must have risen from her knees and left the chapel, so unbearable became the torment, but that the sacring bell rang its triples, the deep tones of the Sanctus answered from the turret, and the host was lifted up. Then her tense nerves relaxed. The almost tangible presence of evil withdrew itself. She breathed more freely, and peace flowed in balmy waves upon her stormy soul. In prayer for herself and those who were most dear to her, she lost the sense of the unseen hands plucking at her garments and the soundless voice whispering at her ear. And presently at the Ipsis Domine, when supplication is made by priests and people for the departed, she prayed for the soul of the denier, that the divine mercy might reach and enfold him, and lead him yet into the way of peace. Christ is risen who created all things, and who hath had pity upon mankind. Purchased people, declare his virtues, Alleluia. Who hath called you out of darkness into his admirable light? To Patrine the call had come. It was Easter week, and there were many communicants. The nuns and the French and English Red Cross nurses helped the lame to reach the altar rails and guided the blind. When a tall, blond young English officer with bandaged eyes and an empty sleeve was led up to his master's table, Patrine was grateful that the chapel was so dusk. She was to meet the chaplain of the Porphyrial Stationary Hospital after Mass, the Mother Superioress had said. Thus, guided by an Ursuline sister, she passed from the chapel into a long, whitewashed cloister looking on the garden, its open arches facing the doors of what had been classrooms, and now were wards. Another Ursuline, the sister superintendent of the hospital, with a young, gentle face framed in her close white gimp and flowing black veil, sat writing in a big book at a plain deal table. Near her were some shelves with rows of bottles, and a chest of drawers with measuring glasses upon it, and a pestle and mortar and druggist's scales. Above the table, a black wooden crucifix hung against the whitewashed wall. This is Sower Catherine, who keeps the hospital accounts and dispenses the medicines, and posts the register in which we set down the names of all the wounded received and discharged. Take care, mademoiselle, that paint is new and comes off, cried the chaperoning sister, snatching aside the skirt of Patrine's long blue VAD coat. She had brushed, in passing, against a wooden tablet that leaned against the wall near the door through which she had come. A big square of black-painted deal, surmounted by a gabled and eaved cross of German pattern, and bearing an inscription in white Gothic lettering. Heire Root im Gott ein deutscher Fliegend Offizier. That is for the grave of the German officer who died yesterday. One of the Bavarian soldiers is painting it. He has not finished. He has only gone away for a moment to get some more cerus from Mother Madeleine. Sister Catherine offered the explanation. She added, as the tall English girl glanced at something that lay on the deal table beside the register. That is his flying cap, poor man, and the belt that shows his rang militaire. They will be placed upon the pall when they carry him to the cemetery. But pardon, one should have observed before that mademoiselle was suffering. What? Mademoiselle is not ill, not even a little fatigued. Then what mademoiselle needs is a petty déjeuner. And Patrine was whisked away to the guests' refectory to be refreshed with pistolets and coffee. Monseigneur would follow a little later. Madame la Supérieure had arranged for Monseigneur to take déjeuner with l'aumônière. Later, Monseigneur hoped for the pleasure of meeting the English mademoiselle. Mademoiselle's tall rounded figure, ushered by the little active Ursuline sister, had barely passed through the glazed swing doors leading from the cloister to the convent, when the short, spare, elderly priest who had celebrated Mass entered from the chapel, followed by the convent aumônière, who had served him at the altar. Even as the nun rose from her table, the vividly clear eyes of Monseigneur, set in the mask of dry walnut-brown wrinkles, dropped on the painted headboard propped against the wall. That is for him. The supple right hand of Monseigneur waved towards the chapel, then extended itself to the sister, who curtsied and kissed his amethyst ring. For him, Monseigneur, answered the aumônière, to whom the question had been addressed. Dieu veut avoir son âme. The left sleeve of Monseigneur's decidedly rusty serge soutane bore the well-known brassard. Its scarlet and white peeped between the folds of his heavy black mantle as he made the sign of the cross. His name is missing from the inscription, he commented, producing a battered silver snuff box and helping himself to a generous pinch. Why, might one demand? The initials will be painted in presently, Monseigneur. There will be no name, by desire of the deceased. He preferred anonymity. The amethyst ring of Monseigneur's prelacy flashed violet as he dusted the brown powder from his upper lip with a blue-checked handkerchief. The Père Aumônière tells me, his startlingly clear eyes were on the sister, that terrible as were his injuries, he might have recovered, that his death occurred suddenly and unexpectedly. But yes, Monseigneur, he might have recovered. The fair face framed in the narrow gimp was shadowed and troubled. The coup d'obus had spared the brain, arteries, and vertebra. His sight was uninjured, le Commandant and his colleagues had achieved wonders in the partial restoration of the visage. Speech was difficult, but we could understand him, unless he was sullen and would only speak German to us. But at those times, a Bavarian soldier interpreted, he who has painted the headboard for the grave. He, the German officer, was grateful to those who nursed him, inquired Monseigneur of the aumônière. The stout little chaplain visibly hesitated. It was the sister who answered in her clear and gentle voice. Alas, no, Monseigneur, he was arrogant, even brutal. But then, he suffered so terribly, in mind as in body, one could not be angry at anything he said. He could not resign himself to his disfigured condition. It was intolerable, he would cry, that he should now be an object of horror to women, women who had worshipped him almost as a god. Chut chut, well, one presumes he meant a certain type of women, observed Monseigneur. Possibly so, Monseigneur. The simplicity of the fair face in the narrow gimp was touching. For when we assured him that we did not regard him with horror, he would say to us, "That makes nothing, I speak of women, you are only nuns." "But nuns are women," objected Monseigneur. Monseigneur, he said not. When his condition seemed to him most miserable, he found relief in saying things, abusive, outrageous, about nuns. We didn't mind. We pitied him, poor number 20. But the French and English officers in the same ward resented this. They entreated us to remove him to a separate room. This we did, and at his request the Bavarian was placed in the same apartment. He has been an officer's servant, and is active and useful, even though he has lost a leg. Thus things went better. Poor 20 seemed more contented. He even looked forward to leaving the hospital. And then, a change, a relapse, suggested Monseigneur. A change? He became more gloomy, more violent after a letter arrived for him from England at the Jour des Morts. Since 2 days comes another letter. We heard him raving of perfidy, the folly of his agents, the injustice of his emperor, the revenge upon the Englishwoman that he would never have now. Then all was quiet. Towards morning the Bavarian came out of the room and called an orderly. The Herr Hauptmann was sleeping, he said, in such a queer way. From that unnatural stupor he never awakened. All his letters and papers were torn up and scattered in fragments. There was a little cardboard box on the night table and a pencil billet for me. I am to send a ring he always wore to the address of a noble young lady at Berlin. She was his fiancée, I believe, Monseigneur. He thanks me for the little I have been able to do for him. He begs the sisters to pardon his rudeness. He wishes no name upon his grave, but to be forgotten. Poor broken body, poor rebellious heart, poor stubborn, desperate soul. You think, then, that he killed himself? Asked Monseigneur with directness. I dare not think. She was searching in her table drawer with tears dropping on her hands. I can only pray that the autopsy of the surgeon will not reveal that the death was not natural. Look, Monseigneur, this is his ring. A big black and white pearl, and under the pearl, which lifts up, is a little box for something, a relic perhaps, or a portrait, or a lock of a friend's hair. It might serve as a reliquary. At need, my child, said Monseigneur, examining the platinum setting. He gave one swift glance at the unsuspicious almoner and another at the innocent nun. He peered again narrowly at the empty hiding place, to the shallow sides of which a few atoms of glittering gray dust were adhering. He lifted the ring to his nose and sniffed, tapped the little box on his thumbnail, and touched his tongue to one of the glittering gray specks. Then he hastily spat in his handkerchief, and thunderclouds sat on the furrowed forehead over the great hooked beak. Listen. The nun started and grew paler still. She hurried to the glazed doors opening on the garden and threw them wide apart. As the chill outer air rushed in, sporting with the scant white locks of l'Aumônier, fluttering the purple lappets at the throat of Monseigneur, and tugging as with invisible hands at the sister's thin black veil, approaching footsteps crunched over the sloppy gravel of the cloister walk. The small, stout figure of the sister-keeper of the mortuary headed the small, solemn procession. She held up her habit out of the slush and carried, as well as a mammoth iron doorkey, a small bunch of spring flowers. A stretcher squad of the French Red Cross followed the sister of the mortuary. In life, the man they bore must have been a magnificent specimen of humanity. In death, the length of his rigid form appeared phenomenal. The black velvet pall, over which had been draped the black-red-white German war ensign, was far too short to cover the stiff, blanket-swathed feet. That they projected beyond the stretcher end with an effect of arrogance and obstinacy was the thought that occurred to one of the 3 people gathered in a little group upon the threshold of the cloister doors. Monseigneur, my father? Sister Catherine was speaking in suppressed but eager accents. It is number 20. They are taking him to the mortuary. The sister-keeper promised to carry flowers as a sign that all was well. You understand, do you not? The surgeons have decided, thanks be to God, that the poor man did not poison himself. She dropped to her knees and began to say a decade of her rosary, the wooden beads running between her fingers like brown water as she prayed. The priests made the sign of the cross silently as the body was borne past. When the last feather of the black eagle had vanished, and the crunching of footsteps on sloppy gravel had thinned away in distance, the nun rose. "You feel happier now, my sister, do you not?" Monseigneur asked kindly. "Much happier, Monseigneur," she said, "for now I may pray for him." Monseigneur, who had retained the ring, shut the hiding place with a decided click, snapped into its slot the end of the bar that held the magpie pearl in place, and said as he restored the bauble to the nun, "Who knows but that some ray of divine grace may yet shine upon that darkened soul? Do as the owner begged of you, and pray for him by all means." "That I will," she said fervently. "And you also, will you not pray for him, the poor, proud pagan who believed no resurrection possible unless one were to exist again as a vapor or a tree? Alas, I fear I have sinned much in yielding to the feeling he inspired in me," she added, meeting the keen glance of Monseigneur's vivid eyes. "The feeling of repugnance, of horror, Monseigneur. Here comes the Bavarian to finish the inscription. Well, my good cooler, you have got some more ceruse." The glass doors had been darkened by the shape of a one-legged man on crutches, a black-haired, swarthy fellow dressed in the maroon flannel uniform distinctive of the hospital. A little pot with a brush in it dangled from one of his big fingers. He glanced up under his heavy brows, with a muttered word as he passed the sister, and returned the greeting of Monseigneur with a clumsy attempt at a salute. "You are better, you are getting on," said Monseigneur to him in German. "Better, main vader, and getting on. That is well, and you have only a little bit to do, and then your work is done." "Done, main vader," echoed the one-legged man. He went to the headboard where it was near the door leading to the chapel, leaned his crutches against the wall, and began cautiously and painfully to let himself down. Monseigneur and the aumônier hurried to his assistance, saw him safely squatted upon his folded sack, took leave of the sister, who knelt to receive the blessing of the hand that wore the amethyst ring, and vanished through the farther door at the urgent summons of a bell. The sister turned again to her big ledger. A list of articles appurtening to the deceased would have to be checked and verified. 2 pairs of binoculars, surely the one bearing the name and address of an officer in a British Guards regiment, ought to be sent to the Allies' headquarters at St-O. 2 purses, one full of English sovereigns, a stout roll of French banknotes in a pigskin case, and so forth. When next she looked round, the Bavarian was wiping his brushes. The finished inscription now stood: "Hier Root im Gott ein deutscher Fliegend Offizier T. V.H. Jahr alt." "You are sorry for him, are you not, my good cooler?" the nun asked mildly as the Bavarian scrambled to his solitary foot and stood supporting himself against the wall. "Sorry, my sister?" He spoke in thick Teutonic French and looked at her under his lowering black brows as he reached his crutches out of the corner and tucked them under his arms. "Why should I be sorry? He's dead, and so an end of him. Total kaput for another officer." He saluted the sister and stumped out. Chapter 72 *. Love that has wings. Under a blue sky, the forget-me-not blue of April tiny blizzards, mere dust of snow, alternated with slashes of sleet. The road running east from Poferil was villainous, bad pavé in the center, and on either side morasses of mud from which rose at irregular intervals, scraggy poplars hacked by shell fire and barked by the impact of innumerable iron-shod wheels. An almost continuous line of transports bumped over the abominable pavé. Staff cars with British brass hats and red French capes gold-braided, motor guns and caissons, motor lorries, motor ambulances, motorcyclists, pedestrians, chiefly Belgian peasants in tall peaked caps and long blue blouses, caked to the knees in sticky mire. Odd detachments of French artillery, a squadron of chasseurs in the new uniform of sallow blue, a half-battalion of magnificent, singing Canadians, loaded on the dark green motor buses that used to run from Holloway to Westminster Bridge, where French police were posted at crossroads, and a working party of British engineers were mending the highway, filling up shell pits, and the cunningly concealed emplacements where a battery of French 75s had been in action a few months before, and the shrapnel-riddled houses of a small village yet harbored a few wizened Flemish peasants, was the point whence you first caught sight of the towers of the ancient capital of Western Flanders, rising above a bank of gray mist, sucked from the thawing earth by the warmth of the April sun. An historic city of gabled houses, a city on a river long lost and vaulted over, a city as famous through its industries of cloth weaving, and the exquisite manufacture of cobwebby lace of Valenciennes, as precious to students of art and literature by reason of its stirring history, and the wonders it enshrined. A matchless city, the glory of Flanders Occident, with its cloth hall of the marvelous early Gothic facades, its Renaissance needlework and ancient steadyhoes, its glorious cathedral on the north opposite the Halles, with the unfinished tower by Martin and Tenhove, and the triumphal arch in the west porch by Urban Talibert. Since October 1914, when a British brigade with 2 battalions of another BB had successfully withstood the desperate attacks of the flower of the Prussian Imperial Guard, the beautiful old city had suffered bombardment, furious, purposeful, desultory, or intermittent, from the enemy's 11.2-in long-range Krupps. That first battle, fought upon a line extending from a few miles northeast of the city, had been succeeded after the partial lull of winter by a second, a stubborn and sanguinary renewal of the struggle, rendered hideous by the use of the Boche's trump card, flaming oil jets and asphyxiating gas. Now the pride of Flanders Occident stood as it stands today, like the heart of a martyr calcined but unconsumed in the cold ashes of the pyre. Its sad and stately dignity was marvelously beautiful, under the blue April sky, with its lashes of wintry sleet. Its gardens were dressed in green spring livery. The grass was peeping between the cobblestones. The scorched and broken chestnut trees that had shaded the promenades on the site of its ancient ramparts were thrusting out their pinky-brown, finger-like buds. And above the shell-pitted waste of uncut brass, now representing the Plaine de Moor, where the reviews used to take place, and the kermesses, and athletic club competitions, where the aerodrome is cut by the line of the canal that receives the waters of the subterranean river. A lark was singing joyfully as it climbed its airy spiral, and a blind man was standing by the twisted ruins of a British aeroplane, drinking in the music that rained from the sky. In the battered Rue Delverding, behind a block of the ruined prison, the car that had brought Sherbrand waited. A gray car with the Red Cross and a miniature replica of Old Glory on the bonnet. The Belgian chauffeur smoked cigarettes and read the Independence Belge industriously, the American VAD. Orderly smoked also, surveying the wreckage at the end of the wide thoroughfare, between whose gaunt and roofless walls was revealed a vista of the Grand Place, where the west facade of the cathedral reared, a calcined skeleton above the ruined halls, and the belfry whose massiveness defied the genii of destruction for a few weeks to come. Yet he kept his eye on his charge, solicitously. No creature is so utterly unaided by the senses, so pathetically defenseless as a recently blind man. Drives were part of the treatment prescribed for Sherbrand by the American surgeon of the hospital at Poferil. The chauffeur and the attendant were instructed to humor him, and his humor craved solitude and the sense of space. This excursion to the plain lying northwest of the stricken city, where death and ruin were burgomaster, and bishop, was not the first by several. The few remaining inhabitants, the pale women who made lace in the shelter of broken doorways, the feeble old folks from the almshouses, who peered from their cellar refuges at the crunch and grind of armored wheels upon the bricks and timbers heaped upon the littered thoroughfares, dully wondered at these visits of the blind Englishman. They had seen many strange things of late, the red-eyed, meager, ague-bitten old people. Since that day in early October when 15,000 Kaisermen, chanting the German war song, had defiled for 6 mortal hours through the streets of their ancient town. "There are a great many of you gentlemen," some of the old folks had ventured to say. "That may be so," they had been told, "but we have millions waiting to follow. We are sure to win, the French are cowards and the English stupid fools. As for you, you are now all Belgo-Germans, our Kaiser has said so. When we leave here we are going to Calais, Paris next, and then London. It's nothing at all to get to London in our magnificent Zeppelins." Then suddenly the Germans had gone away, and with them trains of wagons crammed with booty. A week later, amidst the vivas of the people, 21,000 British had poured into the town. They had rolled down the streets like a tawny river singing lustily. "Here we are, here we are, here we are again. Hallo, tallo, tallo, tallo." And the crowd had been quick to catch up the chorus, responding, Iria again, hallo, allo, allo, allo. And the British headquarters had established itself in its spiderweb of intelligence at the house of the burgomaster, and the very next day a Boche aviator had tried to drop a bomb on it, and had been winged by a clever shot from an anti-aircraft gun and brought crashing down on the plain de Moor. And there had been rejoicings on the part of the young people who were thoughtless. But the wise old folks had known quite well that many more Tobs would come. What an autumn it had been, dear Lord, thought the trembling old people. The first Sunday in August, with its decorations, processions, hymns, and litanies all in honor of Our Lady of Thine, had been turned into a demonstration of penitence. The kermesse had been prohibited with the other festivities. No use baking honey cakes and marzipan. Nobody would have bought them. The Ypres were too busy listening to the distant firing of terribly great guns. All the window panes rattled and shivered, and the earth vibrated without ceasing. Each morning brought dreadful news, contradicted every afternoon and confirmed at night. Towns bombarded, townsmen shot, hung, or burned, children and women, even nuns, violated and murdered. Villages wiped out. These were the stories that found their way into the deafest ears. Crowds of refugees evacuated from these towns, and villages presently began to throng in. Soon the streets were full from wall to wall. Spies moved everywhere, and no lights dared be shown at night time. Bread grew scarce, the dreadful sound of the guns drew nearer. Wounded, Allies and Germans also, were brought in thousands, by the ambulance cars. The hospitals and hotels and convents were full, all the schools, and many of the private houses. Terrible rumors gained ground of a great battle about to be fought in the neighborhood of the town. Peering from garret windows by day or night, one could see great banks of black smoke towering on the north, east, and west horizons, pierced by broad licking tongues of cherry-colored flame. Tobs and Allied aircraft fought battles in the heavens. Bombs were dropped upon public buildings. Death had begun to be common in the streets when the first Krupp shells fell and exploded in the moat behind the Abbey Church of St. Jacques. 10 minutes later, upon the doomed city fell the direst fury of the German hate. It had been as though hell had opened, as under that hail of iron and fire the troops and transports of the Allies and the long processions of townspeople afoot and in carts and carriages had rolled out of the town. Even the dogs had left, following their owners. Like the cats, who clung to their familiar surroundings and had to be removed by force if they were to be taken, the old folks resisted the sturdy hands that tugged at them. "Leave us," they quavered. "We are so old, we can never bear the journey. We should only die upon the roads if we were to go." Many did go, and many died, and of those who stayed behind them, steel, iron, and fire claimed a heavy toll. But in the northern quarter, some yet dwelt in cellar basements, feeding on moldy flour and frozen potatoes. Sleeping on sacks of straw, covered with rugs or blankets, warming their lean, shivery bodies at braziers, choking behind masks taken from slain men through deadly gas attacks, creeping up between bombardments for a breath of purer air. Venturing forth to kneel upon the littered pavements of roofless churches, and pray to our Lord before his vacant tabernacles and shattered crucifixes, for an end to the dreadful war. And no answer came, it seemed, for all their praying. They had grown used to the dampness underground. Their eyes were now accustomed to the gloom, as their ears to the stunning crashes of the bombardments, and the perpetual whir and buzz and whine of the aircraft in the sky. So natural had become to them the abomination of desolation that they actually resented the occasional visits of the Red Cross car from Poferil. "Behold him again," they grumbled, "the tall, blind Englishman. What does he seek here? Hardly to view our ruins that he has no eyes to see, and now in another big gray car arrive a French priest and a woman, asking, wherever they meet a soul to ask, if the blind Englishman is here. The priest is a Monseigneur, old Ottilie swears to the ring and the purple collar. The woman is English, it appears. Perhaps she is the blind man's wife." The car moved on where the roadway was not broken by trenches, crawling painfully over litter and wreck. In the shadow of the ruined prison, while yet the sun was high, they halted. Their chauffeur nodded to his Belgian compatriot, the Red Cross orderly, interrogated by Monseigneur, pointed to the tall brown figure standing on the grass beside the twisted wreckage of a British aeroplane. "I will wait here for you, mademoiselle," said Monseigneur, getting out and assisting his fellow traveler. She was very tall and of supple figure, and wore a long blue coat with the Red Cross shield badge, and a felt hat banded with the VAD. Ribbon, pulled down over luxuriant masses of hair that had been cloudy black as stormwrack and had been bleached to the hue of wintry beech leaves, and now had darkened to the brown of peat earth, deepening in color every day. She gave Monseigneur her hand, thanking him, and suddenly he thought her beautiful, although the tall young woman had not previously appealed to the sense of beauty in Monseigneur. Her long eyes under their widely arching brows were stars, her mouth was smiling. When she moved away over the snow-patched grass, she seemed to tread on air. Throughout the drive, Patrine had been torn with horrible misgivings. What shall I say or do? She had wondered. How shall I bear it if the look upon his face should tell me, when Alan first hears my voice, that I was wrong to come? But the chilly fit had passed with the first glimpse of Sherbrand. The rich, warm flood rising in her veins had swept her doubts away. Here on this shell-pitted expanse of turf, you felt the war pulse beating. French 75s were putting over a furious barrage from the south. North of the city of the salient, the British guns were slogging, and through the chain fire of the enemy's 77 Miss, his 11.2 in, howitzers bellowed at short intervals and sent in 600-pound shells. The smoke of a train rose northwest in the direction of Thouwerhout Junction. That the train was a German train, carrying troops and guns and munitions for war purposes, did not at once occur to Patrine. All was well. Not a doubt remained. She was near her flying man again after months of separation. Here at last was food for her hungry eyes and drink for her thirsting soul. He has grown thin, poor dear, she thought, seeing how the war-stained khaki hung in folds on his tall figure. The broad shoulders stooped, the chest had sunken, and he leaned upon a heavy walking stick. The beloved face was turned away, the line of the cheek was careworn. She choked upon a sob and stopped short, fighting her emotion down. The song of the soaring lark broke off. The bird dived to earth and hid itself amongst the frosty grasses as the snoring whir of aircraft came out of the distance, high in the sky to the west. Now the shape of a big biplane gleamed pinky-white as a seagull, beating up against the thrust of the snow-tanged easterly breeze. Nearer and nearer flew the plane. Now one could see it distinctly. A French machine by its blue-white tread rings and a caudron by its great square tail. A silver-gray monoplane scurried in its wake, a Weiss by the backward curve of its wingtips. The whir of its tractor and the bladder of its machine gun wakened the echoes sleeping among the leprous white ruins of the city. The caudron wheeled and circled beautifully, and the track of its mitraille answered the machine gun, and spent bullets began to patter on the plain far below. Suddenly the Frenchman banked and began to climb. The Weiss, its aluminium sheathing glittering in the sunshine, climbed too, so rapidly that the enemy's purpose was foiled. Then, at a great height, they circled round each other, and the crack and flare of explosive revolver bullets began to mingle with the bladder and track, and little blobs of something that blazed and sputtered wickedly began to drop with the bullets that tumbled out of the skies. It was the prettiest sight. It suggested the amorous dallying of two big butterflies, the squabble of a pair of hawking swallows, and yet the issues were life and death. Suddenly the Weiss took to flight. A second caudron had showed upon the distance, and the Kaiser's flyer was not taking any more on. Waiting for his countrymen to come abreast, the Frenchman hovered like a kite hawk. And at the familiar buzz of the horizontal screws, a visible thrill went through Sherbrand. He took off the smoked glasses that he wore and turned his blind eyes upwards towards the sound, and on his haggard face was stamped the anguish of his despair. "My poor boy," nearly broke from Patrine, and hot tears scalded her eyelids. He started, though she had uttered no word, and brought down those unseeing eyes. His nostrils expanded as he inhaled the air. His thick fair brows contracted. The first caudron, exchanging signals with the second, had ceased hovering and floated onwards, but Sherbrand's thoughts had been brought down out of his sky. "What is it? Why?" said the intent and frowning look. He snuffed the air again and pondered still, and suddenly Patrine comprehended. Some waft of perfume from her hair or clothes had reached the sense made keener by his blindness, evoked some once-loved image, roused some memory of her. She crouched low and looked up at the lean, lined visage yearningly. Dear heart! How changed he was today from her young Mercury of the Mills Plaisirs. And yet this altered face of his, marred by the broad, new-healed scar that traversed the left cheek and temple, and the cloudy look of suffering in the prominent gray-blue eyes, was dearer than ever to Patrine. How bravely the ribbon of the Croix de Guerre and the purple, green, and silver of the Belgian Order showed against the war-stained khaki. What woman living would not glory in such a lover, welcome the sacred charge, rejoice to be his guide and minister? "Oh, my blind eagle, to sit mateless in the darkness shall not be your fate," God being good to me. Some words like these were on the lips of Patrine. But the words were unspoken. He was turning those cloudy, troubled eyes towards his unseen sky again, as though trying to project the vision of his soul through the depths of aerial distance. Then he desisted as though wearied by the effort. His stern face softened to dreamy tenderness. His lips moved. Very quietly, but with infinite wistfulness, he uttered her own name. Patrine, Patrine. He was thinking of her, he was dreaming of her, he was still her lover. She knew a joyful shock, a checking of the pulses. Then her blood whirled on its crimson circle as though arteries and veins were brimmed with wine. Her bosom heaved, her eyes were misty jewels, and out of the wonderful silence about them came to her the low, sweet soughing of her long-lost wind of joy. She moved to Sherbrand, kissed him full upon the mouth, and called him, "Alan," and a great cry broke from him, a cry of wonder, triumph, and joy. As his arms swept out to enfold her, she knew that she had conquered. She had not been deceived in reading love between the formal lines. Life has nothing more to give, was Patrine's thought as his arms held her. It seemed that death would be a tiny price to pay for such a wonderful moment as this. My love, did you really think we could live without each other?" She stammered through his eager kisses. "Didn't you know I would have to come and carry you back home by the hair of your head? Did you dare to dream that I or any of the people who love you could get on without you? Your mother, and Aunt Lynette, and Bon, and Uncle Owen, and Sir Rowland, who managed things for me to come to you, and Margot and her boy, for there is a boy, a regular topper, born last November, with eyes just like poor Franky's. And you're to come back and be kind to him and his mother, because you promised Franky you would, so that old ghost of your succession to the Viscounty is laid, and I'm glad of it. Another stone heaved out of the way that leads me back to you." She went on, holding him as he held her embraced, pouring herself out in a swift rush of eager utterance. "Come back and help us readjust values. Everything's changed, everything's altered, since the beginning of the war. We women have found out, even the idlest and the vainest of us, that the things we used to live for really meant nothing. What we have called society is a box of broken toys. The plays we have laughed or cried at, the books we have read, the music we have gone rabid over, the frocks we have sported, the flirtations we have reveled in, the scandals we have discussed, none of these mean anything, count for anything, weigh anything. Nothing is real but life and love and death. Not life like the life we used to know, nor love like the love we talked of. A life of work and help and prayer and hope and courage and the kind of love that has wings and doesn't crawl in the mud. Nothing like the death we used to dodge and blink and dread so, but something nobler. Something that leads through the gate of the grave, to God. Don't you see that the war was sent to change us? Don't you see?" He cried out, "I shall never see again." An ugly spasm wrenched his jaw aside. "They think I take it pluckily, but every night I dream it over once more, and the sky is rushing back, and the ground is swirling up, and the bird is toppling, spinning downwards in a trail of smoke and fire. I can hear my observer screaming, poor, poor fellow. How I escaped burning I don't know. Then comes the crash, and the gray void of nothingness out of which, eons later, I crawl into a blind man's dreadful world. A world that is all sounds and voices and sounds and touches. A world where I must live and die in the dark." She said in her deep, sweet voice, with her velvet cheek pressed against Sherbrand, "S. With me, and suppose you saw me, and could not feel nor hear me." She felt him shudder as he answered, "The thing would be hell. Well then, let me try and make the best of it. For both of us, my dear one." She pressed closer to his breast, magnetizing him with her touch, her breath, her presence, summoning all her forces of womanly allurements to charm him from despair. "Couldn't I reconcile my lover to the dark?" she whispered. "Are you cold, dearest?" he asked, for as the last words left her lips, a sharp vibration had passed through her. "You shivered as though you were." "Perhaps, I hardly know," said Patrine, thrusting away the loathed memory of the Upas. "Perhaps the wind has shifted, or a goose walked over my grave." She changed her tone and began to tell him how Margot had evicted her Uncle Derek and his Lepidopthingambobs, and handed over the caravanserai in Hanover Square to the Red Cross people for a hospital, and how all the wards were to be covered with vulcanized rubber, not a corner to catch a dust speck anywhere. And she went on to describe her journey in search of Sherbrand, and her disappointment at finding him absent from the hospital at Poferil. and the kindness shown her by the Monseigneur who had escorted her from Saint-O, and subsequently insisted on accompanying her here. For it's supposed to be risky, she ended, smiling. He says, to me it seems like spitting in the face of a dead body, that the Germans shell the poor place nearly every day. It's true, they've pitched high explosive in once already this morning, and as I mean to marry you tomorrow, said Sherbrand, we had better be off out of it before they repeat the dose. He added, there's an English Catholic priest at the hospital, and I've my special license still tucked away in a pocket. She exclaimed in delight. Then you never meant to give me up. Own it, you did. It was you who took your solid oath you wouldn't marry me. Unless you were poor and ill and wanted a woman to nurse you and look after you, her voice broke, and work for you. Oh, boy. No, not boy anymore. My man of all the men that ever were or will be. Don't refuse me the right my love gives me, of working for you, she urged. Such true love, such fine love. Pat, you're a glory of a woman, and you shall work, I'll give you lots of work, he promised her. But my sweet girl, I'm not poor. She asked him in her deep, sweet voice. Do you think you'd be poor to me, if you hadn't a copper halfpenny? And with his arm about her still, and her heart beating against his hand, as they moved over the grass together, she began to describe their home. Quite a small, unpretending, but comfortable home. The home of two people who adored each other and wanted nothing better than to go on doing it up to the last day of their lives. We'll have children, stacks, she assured him. Long-legged boys with beaky, hatchet faces, boys who'll invent and build aeroplanes and fly them too, you bet. And girls, put in Sherbrand, tightening his clasp about the supple, womanly body, great big galumphing girls like their mother. The sweets, she sighed, I can see them now. Ah, that's what I shan't do ever, said Sherbrand. Don't you think they'll be bored with their blind father sometimes, Pat? Just let them dare, let them, that's all. She winked away the tears crowding to her eyelashes. Besides, you mayn't be always blind, I'll never give up praying. Didn't that American surgeon at the hospital say that cases of functional blindness from shock, like yours, supposing there is no serious lesion in the brain, have been known to recover sight suddenly and completely? Don't shake your head. Isn't there a chance, a blessed possibility, to cling to and fight for? Ah. If you were cured, don't you know I'd send you back to the front next day? Don't you, Alan? Yes. Yes, you do. The bright drops rushed in spate over her underlids and hopped over the front of her long blue coat to lose themselves among the frosted grasses as she went hotly on. Don't you believe, you must believe, I'd lay down my life, just for the glory of doing that. Perhaps I usedn't to care much about England before the war, but now I've found out what it means to be a pup of the old bull mother. I'd meet death jumping rather than fail CF doing my bit. What's up? Someone had whistled shrilly behind them, and she wheeled to see Monseigneur and a Red Cross orderly beckoning and signaling, standing on a heap of rubbish on the outskirts of the plain. Sherbrand, for whom the call was meant, waved his stick and whistled in answer. The orderly, at a gesture from Monseigneur, got nimbly down from the rubbish heap and started to cross the intervening stretch of grass. Why is he coming? Began Patrine vexedly. To fetch the blind man, I suppose. Ouch, her long eyes blazed resentment. If anyone but yourself had called you that, send him back, she pleaded jealously. From henceforward nobody is to fetch you or carry you either except me. So Sherbrand laughed in his companion darkness, waved again, and shouted to the orderly to go back. What he said was lost in the racket accompanying the arrival of a German HE shell. For still at intervals during each day, and sometimes at night time, the sad dignity of the deserted city of the salient was outraged by these monstrous messengers of hate. The thing came from the enemy's position east of the city, and fell with a hideous droning note in the wooded park by the Dixmude Gate. A shattering crash followed, as though the roof of the world were tumbling in. The green park of budding trees was rent and splintered, cratered and riven as though a dinosaur had died there of acute rabies, biting and tearing and howking up the earth. Love is a wonderful wit-quickener in necessity. It taught Patrine Saxham, the woman of limitations, exactly what to do at the moment when the great shell droned down to ground. Irresistible as a mountain torrent, she leaped straight for the blind man before her, hurling him backwards by the sudden impact, overbalancing and bearing him down. Pinning him with the sheer weight of her vigorous young body. covering him as nature teaches a tigress to cover her menaced cub, whilst their ears were deafened with the appalling detonation. The solid earth heaved and billowed under their prone, locked bodies, and the air surged and winnowed about them as though beaten by the passage of huge invisible wings. "Is this death?" she asked herself. "Then for both," was her half-conscious prayer. But death passed by in a blizzard of scorching gases, splinters of rending steel, gravel, and stones, splintered timber and pulverized soil, leaving a huge cloud of reddish-yellow billowing over the plain de Moor. A brown powder that stank of verbena thickly coated all visible objects. Hair, skin, and clothes were tinted to uniformity, and a smothering oppression burdened the lungs. Yet as Patrine lay gasping, nerveless, beaten, that fierce, new-kindled instinct of protection lived in her, potent, vital with possibilities as the spark in the battery or the germ in the cell. The great test had found her not wanting nor unready. The dross of self had been burned away in the flame of a passion high and pure. The crown of a noble womanhood was hers in that great moment when her body had made a rampart for the shielding of her love. Under the heave of her bosom, Sherbrand's broad chest panted. He lived, and her heart went up in a rush of passionate thanks to heaven. She moved from him, quaking in every nerve and fiber, crouched beside him, found her handkerchief, and wiped the pungent dust from his face. It was pale, the mouth and eyes were closed, the nostrils fluttered with quick panting. His head had struck against the ground when her leap had hurled him backwards. He had been stunned, she told herself. He would revive soon. "Patrine," he choked out, opening his eyes. "Pat's here by you, my darling." She slipped her strong arm under his neck and helped him to sit up. "You're not hurt." His lungs pumped hard, and his reddened eyes ran water. He blinked it away and caught her hands, crushing them in his grip. "You're sure you're not?" Quite sure, and you're all right, aren't you?" "As right as rain, except for a bump on the head." He freed a hand and rubbed it. "When the shell came over and the ground rose up and hit me, how did it happen?" "I hardly know. Oh, Alan, God has been good to us, hasn't he?" There was no immediate response. Sherbrand's lean face was working. He rose to his knees and thus remained an instant, in silence that gave thanks. Then he got lightly on his feet, reached down and lifted Patrine. And thus they stood, the girl clinging to the young man's broad shoulders as he held her, the tears from her own, still smarting eyes tracing white channels in the dust that masked her quivering face. "You and I, my hat," she gasped. "What a precious pair of scalawags. You lose nothing in not being able to see my flying man. Just now, oh, but the station and the park." She stopped in sheer astonishment. For the deadliest fury of the high explosive had wreaked itself on the bit of municipal woodland. With the electric train station that had neighbored it and the abattoirs in its vicinity, it had been clean wiped out. "Come," said Sherbrand, tightening his clasp as he felt her sway against him. He was supporting, he was guiding as they turned their faces south. Here the death that had passed by had left more traces of its passage. The rent carcass of a gaunt cow that had grazed upon the plain de Moor lay in a steaming crimson pool among the frosty grasses. And beyond, some 30 paces from the Rue d'Elverding, where the automobiles waited near the ruins of the prison, Monseigneur in his flowing black cloak knelt over a stained bundle of ragged blue clothing and shattered humanity, and the Belgian and his fellow chauffeur were bringing a stretcher from the Red Cross car. "The poor orderly has been wounded, no, killed," flashed through Patrine's mind as Monseigneur glanced towards her, gesturing with a supple hand in a swift, expressive way. "I must go over there, I may be wanted," she mentally added, controlling her sick shudder, and reached back to take again the hand of her blind man. But a sudden exclamation from Sherbrand brought round her head, and the strange look stamped upon the face she loved, arrested movement, and checked utterance. "What is it? What has happened?" she forced her stiffened tongue to ask him. "Oh, Alan, tell me, you are not ill." "Not ill," came from the twisted mouth, wrung and convulsed with, was it joy or anguish? He shut his eyes, striving for calmness and coherent speech and wrestling with a fierce emotion that made him sway and totter like a drunken man. "Give me your hand, both your dear hands. Don't mind my shutting my eyes, it'll steady me to tell you. Just now, when you let go of me, something happened and I saw." He choked upon the last word. She faced him, white and wild and desperate, and cried in a voice quite strange to Sherbrand's ears. "You saw, my God, do you want to drive me crazy? Do you mean you can't mean? Does the truth sound so insane?" His voice broke in a sob. He opened the shut, quivering lids through which the tears were streaming, and the gray-blue eyes that looked at her were no longer the dead orbs of one blind. Life and light throbbed in their depths. They glowed with such a radiance as the eyes of the first lover may have shed on the face of the new-made Eve. What was he saying in shaken tones of mingled awe and rapture? I saw what I am seeing now. Trees and green grass and blue sky and your dear face that stayed with me when the big dark blotted out the rest. More loving, more lovely than ever I have dreamed it. Oh, Pat, did ever any man get such a wedding present? His tone changed. My sight for me and death for that poor chap there. Can it be Carpenter, the American who's been so good to me? And the priest helping to lift him, the old man with the noble face. Not Monseigneur, our chaplain at the hospital. He's beckoning, come, let's run. So these happy lovers with death as traveling companion drove away from the city of the salient. There was a wedding next morning at the hospital of Poferil. And 24 hours later, the big black capitalled broadsheets bellowed from Ludgate Hill up Fleet Street and along the Strand to Charing Cross and all through the West End. Romantic sequel to famous aviator's story. Sherbrand of the RFC, blinded in air battle, recovers sight through shell shock. Married yesterday, returns with bride. Captaincy and DSO. A closing picture of a young couple sitting very close together on a rustic seat in the garden of a cottage on Seashire Downs, where hyacinths bloom and clumps of pink-white peonies, and the birds of war whir overhead in a June sky of speedwell blue. Patrine Sherbrand says to her husband, as the smoke of British transports and heavily laden supply steamers slants against the east horizon, and the knife-sharp bows of shepherding destroyers cleave the gray-green waters of the North Sea. If without dishonor to your dear name it lay in my power to keep you with me, do you think I'd have it so? Not I. I'll have you carry on as though I'd never even existed. For me, the work that lies at hand. When that's done, dreams of you. If you were killed, you'd live for me, my man I gave for England. Our England that they'll never beat, not even if they win. Thanks, my sweet wife. Then when I say, our honeymoon is over. Ah well, how soon? He told her, looking in her eyes, that did not flinch beneath his. In 4 days, the medical board finds me quite fit, and there's a flying billet waiting. Our Western Front. She said, as her heart beat on his and their mouths met in a kiss. Then 4 more days of love with me, and fly, my bird of war. The chief scout had said to Sherbrand in those days of July, 1914. The Saxam breeds a stark breed, hard as granite, supple as incandescent lava, with a strain of berserk madness and a dash of oriental fatalism. They can hate magnificently and forgive grandly, and love to the very verge of death. Sherbrand had found it so. He thanked God that this heart that he had won would never change nor fail him. He knew that he could call his own the love that reaches living hands to love beyond the grave. The end.